Hello there, and welcome to Sleepymentary. Tonight we are not simply drifting into history, but into mystery. The kind of mystery that lingers in the shadows of maps, in the architecture of old buildings, and in the nagging feeling that the world we walk upon might not tell us its whole story. Imagine this, a colossal empire spanning continents, its borders inked on maps for centuries by European cartographers, its name Tartaria etched in bold letters across the vastness of Asia, stretching from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Pacific Ocean. An empire so large, so consistent in its appearance across atlases, that one wonders how it could have ever been forgotten. And yet, it was. Before we continue, if this tale keeps you company tonight, leave a like and subscribe, only if it truly feels natural. And now softly tell me, where are you listening from and what hour has the night brought you? By the dawn of the 19th century, Tartaria had all but vanished. Not conquered by armies, not erased by slow erosion of time, but erased with astonishing suddenness, as if a deliberate hand had brushed it off the page of human memory. Modern textbooks dismiss it altogether, reducing Tartaria to a vague placeholder for lands inhabited by nomadic peoples, Mongols, Turks, horsemen of the steppe. But that explanation has never fully satisfied the curious. If Tartaria was just a convenient label for unknown territory, then why did maps for centuries draw clear boundaries? Why did different nations, Dutch, French, German, British, agree on the same cartographic vision of Tartaria? It is here that the enigma begins, because if Tartaria existed in the eyes of generations of geographers, why was it then scrubbed away so decisively? And perhaps more unsettling, what if its disappearance was not simply academic correction but deliberate concealment? Some theorists whisper of a conspiracy, that powerful empires in the 18th and 19th centuries, chief among them Russia expanding eastward into Siberia, erased Tartaria's legacy, folding its territories into their own and rewriting its story. They argue that what we lost was not a term on a map, but the memory of a civilization that may have held knowledge, technologies, even ways of living that threatened the powers rising at the time. And so the legend of Tartaria begins not with what we know, but with what we lost. But this mystery deepens when we look not just at the maps, but at the Earth itself. Across continents, strange anomalies surface: grand buildings half buried in mud, ornate windows peering out from beneath modern sidewalks, entire floors swallowed into the ground, as if the world had risen up to bury them. In Seattle, in New York, in Paris and London, and even in the heart of Russia itself, the same pattern repeats. Could this be coincidence, or are these physical scars of a global cataclysm, a so-called mud flood that may have buried the old world in one terrible sweep? Tonight we step into this puzzle piece by piece. From maps that shouldn't exist to architecture that seems built for another age, or perhaps another kind of human. From the whispers of giants and airships, to the conspiracies of resets and cover-ups. From the comfort of your own bed, we will travel across centuries, across continents, into both the archives of history and the imagination of those who refuse to believe the official story. So settle in, let your breathing slow, the night outside is dark and steady. And as we move deeper into this story, let the boundaries of the familiar soften. Because the world you thought you knew might just have been rewritten. And beneath it, beneath the streets you walk, the cities you pass through, the ruins you visit, another world may still lie waiting. What force could orchestrate such oblivion? Who decided which past was worth remembering and which would be erased? This is the story of Tartaria, the empire that once dominated the maps of Europe and now lingers only as a whisper, a ghost, a question that refuses to die. Close your eyes if you wish and imagine yourself unrolling a great sheet of parchment. Its edges are browned, its ink slightly faded, but the lines remain bold. Mountains rise in intricate sketches, rivers curl like veins, and across the immense canvas of northern Asia, a name sprawls in grand letters: Tartaria. This is no fantasy. For more than 3 centuries, from the 1500s into the late 1700s, maps drawn by Europe's most respected cartographers consistently recorded an empire stretching across half the world. From the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, from the icy shores of Siberia to the mountains of Central Asia, Great Tartary appeared again and again. What makes this so curious is not simply its presence, but its consistency. These were not cooperative efforts. A Dutch atlas might differ from a French or a German from an Italian. Borders shifted constantly in the Europe of the 16th century. Yet on one thing they seemed to agree: Tartaria was there, and it was vast. The maps did not present Tartaria as a vague blank space either. They showed divisions Russian Tartary hugging the expanding borders of the Tsar's empire, Chinese Tartary pressed against the dominions of the Ming and later Qing dynasties, independent Tartary stretching across Central Asia near the Silk Road's ancient arteries. Each was shaded or outlined differently, but all bore the same parent name Tartary, as if acknowledging a single great umbrella under which many realms lay. Why such precision? If Tartaria were nothing more than a cartographer's placeholder for unknown wilderness, why divide it at all? Why not simply colour it grey and write Cognita? Instead, they drew towns, rivers, mountain chains. They marked people and provinces. The implication is that something was known, something tangible enough to merit recognition. Take the 16th century maps of Sebastian Münster, for instance. His Cosmographia depicts Tartaria not as emptiness, but as a sprawling dominion with settlements and regional names. A century later, the famed Dutch cartographer Joan Blaeu echoed the same outlines in his magnificent atlases, dividing the land into neat sections, Great Tartary, Little Tartary, Independent Tartary. Later still, French maps reinforced the image, sometimes showing Tartaria as the largest word printed on the entire continent of Asia, and yet these cartographers were not allies. France, the Netherlands, Spain, England, all were fierce rivals. They vied for colonies, for trade routes, for dominion over seas and markets. Their map makers were not in secret council with one another, but working independently, often with national pride at stake. So why did they all draw the same thing? Why agree even loosely on the scope and divisions of Tartaria? This question is what fuels the fascination, because in other cases, cartographers disagreed wildly. California, for instance, appeared as an island on maps for over a century, copied faithfully despite being wrong. Africa's interior was filled with guesswork lakes, mountains, even mythical kingdoms that never existed. But Tartaria was different. Its outlines did not waver. And that raises another unsettling thought. If these maps were copied from earlier, now lost sources that consistently recorded Tartaria as real, then what were those original sources? Who first charted Tartaria, and how mainstream historians offer one explanation: European cartographers borrowed heavily from accounts of travellers like Marco Polo who described the Mongols and Tatars of Central Asia, and from reports of Russian expansion into Siberia. To them, Tartary was a catch-all term for nomadic lands beyond the reach of Europe's familiar borders, a convenient label for the other. But still, why the divisions? Why the detailed borders? Why did the term endure for centuries only to vanish almost overnight in the 19th century? Theories abound. Some say the maps reflect a genuine empire whose identity was later absorbed and erased. Others propose that Tartaria was more than an empire, that it was a civilization, a cultural and technological network spanning Eurasia, recognized in its day but later silenced. And perhaps the most haunting idea of all, that the very consistency of these maps is the evidence. If rival nations, each working alone, all agreed on Tartaria, then it must have been more than a figment. It must have been something they could not ignore. Tonight, as we follow these maps, let us remember ink has a long memory. Paper may fade, but lines persist. And sometimes what was drawn centuries ago may reveal more than what our textbooks now tell. By the time the 19th century dawned, the familiar maps that once stretched across classrooms, libraries, and royal collections began to change. Where the word Tartaria had sprawled boldly over the vastness of northern Asia, a silence now crept in. One by one, the atlases that had for centuries displayed this colossal dominion replaced it with new names: Siberia, Russian Empire, Chinese Empire, Kazakh Steppe. It was as if a word and identity had been scrubbed away, not gradually with the messy uncertainty of evolving cartography, but abruptly, almost tidily, as though a decision had been made: Tartaria shall be no more. Mainstream history tells us this was a natural shift. By the late 18th century, Russia's relentless expansion eastward had transformed the once unknown Siberian wilderness into provinces and districts. Explorers, surveyors, and soldiers mapped the taiga and tundra with a new precision. Independent Tartary, the Central Asian Khanates were being absorbed by the growing influence of both Russia and China. With borders firming, the vague umbrella term Tartary became outdated, a relic of ignorance swept away by modern cartography. And yet, the suddenness feels suspicious. If Tartaria were merely a placeholder, shouldn't it have faded, slowly replaced piecemeal as new knowledge arrived. But instead, within a generation, the great empire vanished from maps entirely as though a collective decision had been reached across nations. Dutch atlases, French atlases, British atlases, each in its own way erased Tartaria, almost simultaneously. For some, this is where the conspiracy begins. They argue that what we witness in the 19th century is not simple progress, but deliberate suppression. That Russia in particular sought to rebrand vast swathes of land, folding them under its own banner and erasing the memory of what came before. To acknowledge Tartaria as a distinct power might have raised uncomfortable questions. Who were its rulers? What knowledge did it possess, and why did it fall? Even more provocative is the suggestion that Tartaria was not defeated by war, but by something else entirely, a reset, a catastrophe that left its cities buried, its population scattered, and its memory fragile enough to be rewritten. The mud flood theory, which we will explore soon, ties directly to this moment, the idea that a great global event in the 1800s physically buried Tartaria, and that the powers rising afterward erased its name to bury it again, this time in memory. But whether one accepts such theories or not, the fact remains the disappearance was swift, uniform, and striking. Consider this: Europe was in the throes of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Knowledge was accelerating, yes, but also being systematized. History was being standardized into textbooks, curricula, and encyclopedias. A new generation of students was being trained to see the world through precise categories, and in that world there was suddenly no room for Tartaria. So the question lingers: was this the natural refinement of knowledge, or was it in some way an erasure by design? Did the empire vanish because it never existed as such, or because someone wanted us to forget that it did? As you imagine those fading atlases, picture the hand of a cartographer dipping his quill in ink. On an earlier map he has written Great Tartary in sweeping script. On the new one the word is gone, replaced by Siberia. Nothing else has changed. The rivers still curl, the mountains still rise, the seas still border the land, but the name is gone, and with the name an identity vanishes. Now let us descend from maps into the very soil beneath our feet. Because for some theorists, Tartaria was not just erased in ink, it was buried in earth. They call it the mud flood hypothesis, a global cataclysm not of water but of liquefied soil surging across continents in the 18th and 19th centuries. Imagine entire cities swallowed overnight, their ground floors entombed, their windows suddenly staring into dirt instead of sunlight. Streets that once rang with footsteps and markets now hidden beneath layers of hardened earth. It sounds fantastical. And yet when we walk through many of the world's cities we encounter strange clues. Buildings with half-buried windows at what is now ground level. Doorways that open into soil bricked up as though forgotten. Staircases that descend into what should have been streets but now serve as basements. Seattle is one of the most famous examples. Beneath its modern sidewalks lies an entire underground city, blocks of storefronts still with windows and facades now stranded beneath the surface. The official story tells us this was the result of razing the streets after devastating fires and plumbing problems in the late 1800s. And perhaps it was. But the uniformity of burial, whole neighborhoods sunken to the same depth makes others wonder. New York too offers hints. During subway construction, workers uncovered ornate masonry far below the expected layers of earth. Vaulted ceilings, detailed stonework that seemed older, stranger than the colonial structures recorded above them. Was this simply forgotten infrastructure or remnants of a civilization buried alive? Across Europe the pattern repeats. In Paris, buildings with windows and doors half submerged in soil. In London, whole neighborhoods where the basement seems too ornate, too intentional to have been designed as underground spaces. In Russia, where Tartaria's heart once beat, grand palaces reveal buried arches and submerged facades that look as though the land itself swallowed them. Mainstream explanations abound. Urban development raised streets, changing sanitation systems. Over centuries, roads were paved and raised, leaving the original ground floors stranded below. Floods and fires created opportunities for rebuilding, and layers of city life piled upon each other. Archaeology accepts this as a normal rhythm of urban evolution. But the mud flood hypothesis refuses to let go. Proponents argue these anomalies are too widespread, too consistent to be explained away as mere civic remodeling. They describe a singular devastating event. Some claim seismic activity, others plasma discharges from the sky, still others the deliberate triggering of geological liquefaction, that turned soil into slurry, sweeping across the globe in a hidden catastrophe. Imagine the ground beneath your home suddenly turning liquid, foundations sinking as walls slide downward, entire neighborhoods swallowed in minutes, survivors climbing to rooftops as the slurry hardened into solid ground once more. The next day, what was once your first floor is now a basement, your doorway bricked up, your city's memory rewritten. And what if this wasn't merely a natural disaster, but an instrument? A reset designed to bury not just buildings, but the evidence of a civilization that predated ours. For believers in the Tartarian enigma, the mud flood is not only plausible, it is the missing piece. It explains the vanishing empire, the buried architecture, the sudden map erasure. It was a catastrophe of dirt, a deluge of soil, a flood that did not wash away but smothered. Skeptics roll their eyes, of course. They remind us that no global sediment layer from the 1800s exists in the geological record. That photographs and records of raised streets, particularly in Chicago and Seattle, are well documented. That liquefaction occurs during earthquakes, yes, but not in uniform global waves. Yet the images remain compelling and difficult to ignore. Elegant archways peeking from the ground windows, staring out at nothing but soil stairs that lead to nowhere. These are the breadcrumbs that keep the mud flood alive in the imagination. And so we are left with two possibilities. Either these strange buried structures are the result of human practicality, street levels raised for sanitation convenience, or rebuilding, or they are the scars of a catastrophe so vast it has been erased from our collective memory, which seems more unlikely that cities were rebuilt with hidden flaws, or that we are standing atop the bones of a forgotten world. When people first hear of the mud flood, it sounds like a fringe fantasy. But then they walk the streets of certain cities and notice something odd. Half-buried windows, doors that open into the soil, whole facades stranded below street level. These are not isolated quirks, they are patterns. And in places like Seattle, Chicago and New York, the anomalies become too striking to ignore. Take Seattle, for example. Beneath its bustling downtown lies an entire hidden city. Today you can even tour it, dimly lit tunnels, storefronts, sidewalks and facades frozen in time. When you stand there, you are not in a cellar, designed to be underground. You're in what was once the street level. Windows stare out at nothing but dirt, ornate stonework sits buried in shadow, and whole shop fronts look ready to open for business if only they weren't sealed in earth. The official story is straightforward. After the Great Fire of 1889, Seattle's leaders decided to raise the city's street level to solve chronic flooding and sewage issues. They literally built the streets higher, leaving the original buildings below as subterranean basements. On paper, this makes sense, but when you walk those passages, questions arise. Why were the original structures so elaborate, with fine stonework and wide thoroughfares? Why did they match the aesthetic of European cities centuries older, as if designed in another age? And why does the uniform depth of burial about one story repeat across so many blocks as if the city had been drowned, not in fire, but in mud? Now consider Chicago. The Windy City was devastated by the Great Fire of 1871. In the rebuilding frenzy that followed, the entire cityscape was transformed. Officially, engineers raised street levels by as much as 10 feet, jacking up buildings and reconstructing roads above the old. The reason again was sanitation, flooding, sewage, and swampy ground demanded change. But beneath Chicago lie traces of a different story. Old photographs show workers trudging through mud streets with ornate stone buildings already half buried before the fire, and when the city elevated itself, what was left behind was a labyrinth of lower levels, sometimes described as if the earth had swallowed the first floor of the city whole. Even today, in certain corners of Chicago, you can find bricked-up windows beneath sidewalks, relics that look less like planned basements and more like victims of a sudden engulfment. Then there is New York City. During the digging of its subway system in the early 20th century, laborers unearthed something astonishing, detailed masonry vaulted ceilings and elegant stonework lying far below the modern ground. Some were chalked up to forgotten infrastructure or remnants of early construction, but descriptions of certain finds, arched doorways, intricate brick patterns, heavy stone walls sounded far too advanced to be dismissed as incidental. Could New York, like Seattle and Chicago, be standing atop an older city? Critics argue these anomalies have perfectly rational explanations. Cities evolve in layers. Fires and floods force rebuilding. Streets are paved and raised for drainage. What looks like a buried window might simply be an old ground floor left behind. And often they are right. history is filled with examples of practical urban engineering. Yet believers counter that it is the consistency that matters. Why do so many cities around the world, Seattle, Chicago, New York, Paris, London, Moscow, show the same phenomenon at the same depth? Why do so many basements look like they were never designed to be basements at all? And beyond practicality, why do so many of these buried levels boast a kind of craftsmanship that feels out of step with their supposed age? Stone facades of intricate design, masonry that looks older than the cities themselves, details more reminiscent of cathedrals than of hastily built pioneer towns. If we entertain the mudflood hypothesis, then these buried levels are not anomalies at all, they are evidence. Evidence that entire cities were drowned in liquefied earth, and that rather than admit to a cataclysm, the world above simply carried on paving over the old and pretending it never happened. To walk in those subterranean halls is to feel a strange duality. On one level, you are in a historical curiosity, an underground designed by urban planners. On another, you're in a time capsule staring at a world that might once have been the surface before it was smothered by mud and erased from the maps along with the name Tartaria. It is tempting to imagine the mud flood as a peculiarity of the New World, something that happened in restless, fast-growing cities like Seattle or Chicago. But when we turn our eyes back across the Atlantic, we find the same haunting signs etched into Europe's grandest capitals. Walk the streets of Paris and you will notice it. The windows of stately buildings peering out from beneath the pavement, their arches sliced in half by the street itself. Whole rows of ornate stonework now sit at ground level, as if the city has sunk by one story. In some districts, doors open directly into sidewalks bricked up long ago, their thresholds swallowed. Officially, these are remnants of 19th century street raising projects, sanitation improvements, flood protections, the steady piling up of urban life. And yet the sheer number of these half-buried features suggests something broader, something less easily explained. London tells the same tale. In the old city, many buildings reveal what are called subterranean floors, but when you study their facades, you see they were clearly not intended as basements. Georgian and Victorian townhouses often show windows sunk below street level, with coal chutes and the steps descending to what appears to be a buried first floor. The accepted history says the city gradually raised its roads for drainage and sewage. And yet, if you stand in front of one of these sunken homes, it is hard to shake the impression that the street is not higher than it once was, but that the building itself has been partially engulfed. And then there is St. Petersburg. Perhaps nowhere does the puzzle present itself more starkly than in this jewel of Russia, a city built with extraordinary grandeur by Peter the Great in the early 18th century. Visitors marvel at its palaces, cathedrals, and government halls with their soaring facades and classical flourishes. But look closer, and you see the same pattern windows at ground-level decorative arches, now half-buried grand staircases leading down into what seem like cellars, but were clearly designed as main entrances. Official accounts explain this as an engineering quirk. St. Petersburg was built on marshland, and the city's shifting soils and frequent flooding required constant adjustments. Some buildings did sink, others were partially raised. But to the curious eye, these explanations feel thin. Could a city of such deliberate beauty really have been so carelessly swallowed by mud and water? Or is there a deeper story buried beneath its boulevards? The parallels between Seattle and Paris, Chicago and London, New York and St. Petersburg are striking. Across oceans, across cultures, we find the same telltale signs. Grand architecture, partially entombed first floors turned into basements, ornate stonework staring out from beneath our feet. If each of these anomalies can be explained away by local circumstances, fires here, floods there, sanitation elsewhere, then it is an extraordinary coincidence. But if they are part of a single pattern, then the mud flood hypothesis gathers strength. Perhaps the catastrophe was not local at all, but global, its traces hidden in plain sight beneath the world's most familiar cities. And here, another eerie detail, many of these buried structures are built in the same style, with the same classical columns, domes, and decorative motifs, as though echoing a single architectural language spoken across continents. Were these truly separate cities evolving independently, or fragments of a shared civilization, one we have nearly forgotten? In Europe as in America, the whispers persist that beneath our proud capitals lies an older world, a world swallowed not by time, but by Earth itself. By now, the pattern is difficult to dismiss. From Seattle to Paris, from Chicago to St. Petersburg, buildings seem swallowed doorways, sealed windows staring into the earth. It is here that a more unsettling idea emerges. What if these anomalies were not the result of scattered local accidents but the scars of something greater? Some call it the Grand Reset. According to this theory, the disappearance of Tartaria from maps and the half-buried remnants in our cities are not separate mysteries but two sides of the same event. The mud flood was not just a natural disaster, but a deliberate mechanism, whether engineered by human hands or something beyond them, to wipe the slate clean. Imagine it, a world-spanning empire advanced in ways we only dimly perceive, suddenly struck by catastrophe. Its buildings drowned in mud, its population scattered, its memory fragile enough to be rewritten by those who survived. And in the aftermath, a new order rises, not to preserve the past, but to bury it again in history, this time rather than Earth. Supporters of this idea point to the eerie synchronicity. Tartaria vanishes from maps in the early 19th century, precisely when so many cities report sudden street razings, sudden disasters, sudden fires and floods. At the same time, Western education systems begin standardizing history, fixing the timeline of civilization into neat linear progression: Egypt, Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, the Enlightenment. No mention of a vast northern empire, no place for it at all. If this was a reset, it was more than physical, it was cultural, a deliberate erasure and rebuilding. The old buried, the new presented, as if it had always been. But why? Why would anyone engineer such a reset? Some argue it was political. The 18th and 19th centuries were the age of empires: Russia, Britain, France, all expanding, consolidating, claiming dominion. A rival civilization, one with its own technologies and traditions, might have threatened their ascendancy. Erase it and they could claim its territory, its architecture, even its inventions as their own. Others push the idea further. They suggest the reset was not merely about territory or power, but about knowledge. If Tartaria possessed technologies: free energy, sound-based construction, resonance, engineering, these would undermine the industrial economy that emerged in the 19th century. Oil, coal and steam were profitable precisely because they were scarce, costly and controlled. Free power from the air, buildings that harmonized with the planet. That was a future the rising elites could not allow, and so the theory goes, a cataclysm was unleashed. Whether through natural forces harnessed seismic resonance plasma discharges, or through hidden technologies turned against their creators, Tartaria fell. Its people were dispersed, its memory dismantled. The survivors were folded into new nations, their story rewritten. Mainstream historians scoff at such ideas, of course. They argue that the notion of a grand reset is romantic conspiracy, an imaginative way of explaining the perfectly ordinary realities of urban evolution and imperial conquest. And yet even the skeptics must admit history is written by the victors, and what the victors choose to omit can be as telling as what they record. The Grand Reset, then, is less a theory of geology and more a story about power, about who gets to decide what humanity remembers and what it forgets, about whether the world we inherit is truly the world that was, or a version carefully curated for us. When you walk through a city and see a buried window and a sealed doorway, a staircase to nowhere, it may simply be history's clutter, or it may be a whisper from a world before the reset, a reminder that what we call the present is built quite literally upon forgotten pasts. When we speak of the mud flood, we place it in the 1800s, an era of fires, earthquakes, orphan trains, and the quiet vanishing of Tartaria from maps. But what if this reset was not the first? What if it was simply the most recent echo of something far older, a cycle that has played out again and again across human history? This is where Graham Hancock enters the conversation. The journalist turned historian has become a lightning rod of controversy for daring to suggest that advanced civilizations thrived thousands of years earlier than we're taught, only to be destroyed in apocalyptic events. In his works Fingerprints of the Gaze, Magicians of the Gods, and the Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, Hancock argues that humanity's story is not one long march of progress, but a series of rises and catastrophic collapses. The catastrophe he focuses on most is the Younger Dryas, a sudden climatic shift about 1200 years ago. According to mainstream science, this was triggered by the end of the Ice Age: glaciers, melted seas, rose climates, swung violently, megafauna vanished. But Hancock and a growing number of sympathetic geologists points to something sharper, something more violent, a comet impact. Evidence, they argue, lies in a thin layer of black sediment found across North America, rich in nanodiamonds and microscopic spherules, signatures of a cosmic strike. If true, the impact would have unleashed firestorms, floods, and atmospheric chaos on a planetary scale. And here lies the resonance with Tartaria. For believers in the mud flood, the buried cities of the 19th century are not anomalies at all, but the most recent repetition of the same story, an advanced civilization rising only to be swallowed by catastrophe. Just as the comet impact may have drowned a civilization that built monuments like Göbekli Tepe, so too, the mud flood may have buried a civilization that built star-forts cathedrals of resonance and free energy architecture. Think of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a site of towering T-shaped pillars carved with animals and symbols dated to 11,600 years ago, before the pyramids, before agriculture, when humanity was supposedly still nomadic. Mainstream archaeologists insist hunter-gatherers could have managed it, but Hancock and others see something different, the fingerprints of survivors of an earlier erased civilization rebuilding after the flood. Survivors who carried fragments of lost knowledge, just as the Tartarian survivors are imagined to have done in the 1800s. Or think of the great boulder fields scattered across North America landscapes scoured as though by a titanic flood. Mainstream geology says glacial meltwater. Hancock suggests deluge. The mud flood theorists say yes, and it happened again only 2 centuries ago in our own cities. The parallels pile up: the Younger Dryas floodwaters swallowing coastlines, the mud flood swallowing city streets. Civilizations erased, in both cases their ruins misinterpreted or ignored. Skeptics accuse Hancock of romantic speculation, of undermining rigorous archaeology with alluring but unproven narratives. Yet the appeal of his ideas is undeniable. They give shape to a suspicion many people feel instinctively, that history is not a straight line but a broken record repeating the same haunting song of rise, fall, and forgetting. And perhaps this is why the Tartaria and mud flood theories resonate so strongly with Hancock's work. They offer the same pattern, but closer in time, more tangible. They whisper that the cycle did not end with Atlantis or Göbekli Tepe, but that it reached into our grandparents' century, into the streets we still walk today. If the Younger Dryas comet erased one civilization and the mud flood erased another, then what does that mean for us? Are we living in the fragile calm between collapses, blind to the next reset waiting just beyond the horizon? If the mud flood hints at a civilization buried in recent centuries, then the stones of our oldest monuments whisper of something even deeper: knowledge carved in an age when humanity was not supposed to possess it. Here, the parallels to Tartaria become striking, not in time, but in theme. Both suggest that what we call progress is less a straight climb than a cycle of brilliance and forgetting. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. 12,000 years old, it rises centuries before the first cities, before agriculture, before writing. Hunter-gatherers were supposed to be simple transients scraping by with stone tools. Yet at Göbekli Tepe we find massive T-shaped pillars weighing tons, carved with animals arranged in circles that align to celestial patterns. Someone designed this place with sophistication, with mathematics, with an understanding of the cosmos. But who and why bury it, covering it deliberately in earth, as if to hide it until our age rediscovered it? Now move west across the Mediterranean to Malta. There, on tiny islands, stand the oldest known freestanding temples in the world, older than Stonehenge, older even than the pyramids. They are megalithic, with slabs weighing as much as 50 tons, arranged with architectural elegance. And they hum with sound. Researchers have found that certain chambers resonate at specific frequencies that affect human brainwaves, inducing trance-like states. Were these temples places of ritual, of healing, of communication? Or were they some suspect of Tartarian cathedrals, vast machines built to manipulate resonance? Then, of course, the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Mainstream history calls them tombs, but no bodies have ever been found inside their great chambers. Instead, we find shafts aligned to stars, stones cut with laser-like precision, and blocks weighing tens of tons lifted hundreds of feet into the air. Egyptologists insist this was done with sledges, ramps, and patience. Yet even today, with our cranes and steel, the sheer scale inspires disbelief. Were the pyramids like Tartarian star forts more than monuments? Could they have been power stations, resonance chambers, cosmic markers of a lost science across the globe? Echoes repeat. The giant stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, interlocking so tightly that a blade of grass cannot slide between them. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfect as planets. The Moai of Easter Island, staring inland as though guarding something no longer there. Each of these sites bears a common signature: the scale, the precision, the mystery of a knowledge we are told should not have existed. And this is where the Tartarian enigma intersects, because when we look at these ancient megaliths, we are told they are outliers, exceptions, rare miracles of early ingenuity. But when we look at buried architecture in Seattle, Chicago, Paris, St. Petersburg, grand arches, star forts, domes, cathedrals, we see the same patterned stonework that feels older, larger, more advanced than its supposed builders. What if Tartaria was not a unique lost empire, but part of the same cycle that gave us Göbekli Tepe, Malta, Egypt? A later echo of civilizations that rose, flourished, and fell, each leaving fragments of knowledge in stone. The stones do not lie. They bear the marks of tools we cannot explain, alignments we still struggle to calculate, resonances that affect our very bodies. They remind us that memory fades but rock remembers. And if the stones of the deep past carry forgotten knowledge, perhaps the buried basements of our own cities do too. The cycle continues: rise, catastrophe, burial, forgetting. A pattern etched not only in ancient megaliths, but in the very pavements we walk each day. If the streets of our cities are the surface text of history, then beneath them lie the footnotes, long passages of stone, brick and earth that tell another version of the story. Catacombs, vaults, sealed-off chambers. These are not just curiosities of urban planning, but anomalies that hint at layers of civilization buried out of sight, much like the erased maps of Tartaria. Take Paris, for example. Beneath the shining boulevards of Haussmann's 19th century redesign sprawls a parallel world, the catacombs, a maze of tunnels stretching for hundreds of miles. We are told they are old quarries later filled with bones when cemeteries overflowed, and yet within their endless passages we find chambers with perfect arches, intricate stonework, and even symbols carved with precision marks that seem older than their supposed construction dates. Were these tunnels truly carved in the 18th century, or were they adopted from something more ancient, a foundation long predating the city above? Or consider Edinburgh, where beneath the Royal Mile lies the Mary King's Close, an entire street sealed off and hidden under newer construction. Visitors walk through preserved homes, staircases, and marketplaces that once bustled with life before being entombed. Officially it was closed due to plague, but the very idea of a whole neighbourhood buried beneath another invites questions how many other forgotten streets still slumber beneath our modern ones. Cross to Rome, a city famous for layers. The Basilica of San Clemente sits atop a 12th century church, which itself rests on a 4th century basilica, which itself sits on a 1st century Mithraeum. And beneath even that, older stone halls predating the empire. Rome teaches us that history stacks like sedimentary rock, each layer hiding the ruins of another age. If Tartaria ever existed, could its remains too be buried, not in wilderness but under the very cobbles of our cities? In New York, construction crews often hit unexpected vaults, while digging subway lines, arched chambers, brick passages, and forgotten tunnels. Some, like the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel, officially date to the 1840s. Others have no clear record at all, leading to speculation: were they part of an older design, a blueprint erased when history was rewritten? Then there is Odessa in Ukraine, where an underground labyrinth stretches for nearly 500 kilometers. Officially, they are quarry tunnels dug out in the 19th century. But locals tell of hidden chambers, bricked-up doors, and echoes of structures far older than the city itself. Who built them, and for what purpose? The anomalies are not only in Europe. In Derinkuyu, Turkey, archaeologists uncovered an underground city capable of sheltering 20,000 people, complete with stables, chapels, ventilation shafts, and wells. It was hidden beneath an ordinary village waiting to be discovered. Scholars say it dates back thousands of years, but again the pattern emerges: a complete, organized city carved underground, as if expecting catastrophe above. These examples suggest something larger than coincidence. From Paris to Edinburgh, Rome to New York, Odessa to Cappadocia, humanity seems to inherit, not build, its deepest chambers. The upper floors may change with each age, but below lies an architectural palimpsest, a hidden text we rarely read. What if these anomalies are not random, but relics, not just tunnels, but fingerprints of a cycle, civilizations burying their past, or perhaps being buried by catastrophe, leaving behind empty halls for us to rediscover centuries later? And here lies the uncomfortable question: are our basements, our subway tunnels, our underground vaults truly modern, or are they like the erased empire of Tartaria? Fragments of an older world waiting for us to look down instead of forward? If stone holds memory in silence, then metal speaks in defiance of time. Unlike flesh, unlike wood, metal does not easily surrender to the centuries. It corrodes, it weathers, but sometimes against all odds it endures. And in these surviving fragments we glimpse hints of technologies that do not fit neatly into the timelines we've been given. Consider the Iron Pillar of Delhi, standing over this 100 years in the open air. By all rights it should be a corroded ruin. Instead, its surface remains smooth, its structure largely unblemished. Modern metallurgists puzzle over its resistance to rust, proposing high phosphorus content and protective film formation. But step back and a larger mystery looms. How did ancient smiths with supposedly primitive furnaces manage such flawless alloying, something modern industry struggles to replicate on this scale? Then there are the out-of-place artifacts whispered about in fringe archives. In India's Agastya, Samhita texts describe batteries made of copper and zinc plates immersed in acidic solutions. Skeptics dismiss them as poetic metaphors, yet when such devices are recreated they produce current. Did ancient artisans understand electricity long before Benjamin Franklin flew his kite? In Baghdad, an odd clay jar with a copper cylinder inside now, famous as the Baghdad battery, dates back 2,000 years. Was it truly just a storage vessel, or could it have powered simple electroplating, hinting at lost techniques of gilding and preservation? In the mines of South Africa, small metallic spheres have been discovered, some with grooves running around their circumference. They are said to date back billions of years, though. Mainstream science dismisses the claim. Yet the spheres stir the imagination. Are they natural mineral formations or the debris of something once crafted? And then there are advanced alloys from antiquity, Damascus steel whose legendary blades could cut through lesser swords and bend without breaking, woven with patterns like flowing water. The secret recipe vanished, leaving modern metallurgists still chasing its perfection. Corinthian bronze, prized in Rome, said to shimmer with a mix of copper, gold and silver, a technology so admired it became mythical after its loss. Orichalcum, described by Plato in his story of Atlantis, a reddish gold metal supposedly mined in abundance before vanishing from history. In 2015, ingots of a mysterious copper-zinc alloy were dredged from a 2,600-year-old shipwreck near Sicily. Was this the lost orichalcum, an alloy advanced for its age? Even more perplexing are the reports of giant metal objects beneath Siberian swamps, discs or domes of an unknown alloy recorded in 19th and 20th century expeditions to the Valley of Death. Locals spoke of them as the cauldrons, immense structures partly buried in permafrost, impervious to weather. Were they remnants of Tartarian engineering weapons, or merely myths misunderstood as artifacts? Each fragment raises the same unsettling question. Are these isolated miracles of craftsmanship or echoes of a broader forgotten mastery? If Tartaria or any erased civilization did exist, might it have left behind not only buried buildings, but also metals that refuse to decay? And if so, how many have already been melted down, reforged and recast into the anonymous steel and bronze of our present world, erasing the evidence not by hiding it, but by using it? Metal, after all, is both relic and resource. Civilizations consume the legacies of their predecessors, but a few strange survivors, the rustless pillar, the perfect blades, the enigmatic ingots still gleam in the shadows, challenging us to ask whether the real story of metallurgy is far older than the textbooks allow. If metal preserves a memory, then energy leaves an imprint on the very bones of the earth. For centuries, scholars and mystics alike have speculated that ancient cities were not arranged at random, but tuned aligned with forces invisible, drawing on a natural grid that pulses beneath our feet. Consider the idea of ley lines, those mysterious alignments of monuments, temples and megaliths across continents. To orthodox archaeology, they are coincidences of geography and human preference for high ground. But to others, they are traces of a lost science, lines of energy harnessed by civilizations to power not only ritual, but possibly technology. Look at the pyramids of Giza. Their proportions encode advanced mathematics. Their alignment with Orion's belt suggests cosmic intention. And deep within their limestone and granite, some researchers argue lies an electrical function. Experiments show that the stones conduct piezoelectric currents under pressure. Was the Great Pyramid simply a tomb, or was it a vast resonant machine transforming Earth's vibrations into usable power? Far across the ocean, the temples of Teotihuacan in Mexico stretch out in a grid eerily reminiscent of a circuit board. The Pyramid of the Sun rests atop layers of mica, an insulating mineral used in modern electronics. Why would ancient builders go to such lengths unless they sought to channel energy? Even in Europe, megalithic stone circles like Stonehenge, Karnak and Callanish do line up with solar and lunar cycles, but also seem to hum with acoustic and magnetic anomalies. To stand in their centre is to feel not only history, but perhaps the ghost of an energy field. And what of St. Petersburg, a city central to the Tartarian legend? Its grand boulevards and star-shaped fortresses align with geomagnetic nodes. Some claim its cathedrals with soaring domes, metal spires and resonant interiors functioned like giant capacitors drawing down atmospheric electricity and redistributing it. Even in old illustrations of 18th and 19th century cities, strange antenna-like devices appear atop buildings. Lightning rods, yes, but some argue they were more. The free energy hypothesis suggests that what we call ornament may once have been infrastructure copperdomes, gilded finials and iron crosses, all part of a network capturing telluric currents and atmospheric charge. Cathedrals as power stations, obelisks as transmitters, entire city plans as grids humming with the invisible breath of the earth. Mainstream science dismisses this as pseudo-history, yet the persistence of the idea, from Nikola Tesla's dream of wireless electricity to the legends of Atlantean crystals, points to a human intuition that we once lived closer to the pulse of the planet. If the mud flood buried a civilization, perhaps it also buried a technology of harmony cities designed not against nature but in resonance with it. And if that is true, then the story of power itself changes. Electricity was not invented but rediscovered. The question lingers, were we meant to inherit this knowledge, or was it deliberately hidden? Reset with the maps, the names, the narratives. From the ground, a wall is only a wall and a ditch is only a ditch. But from above, from the vantage of a bird or a god, shapes emerge. Circles, stars and spirals too vast to be grasped by the human eye. Consider the Nazca lines of Peru etched into desert gravel between 500 BCE and 500 CE. From the surface they are meaningless scratches. From the air they bloom into hummingbirds, spiders, monkeys and perfect geometric forms stretching for miles. The mainstream explanation holds that they were ritual pathways for gods who descended from the sky. But skeptics ask who was meant to see them when human flight was supposedly unknown. Now look northward to the earthworks of Ohio and the Mississippi Valley. Serpent Mound undulates across the landscape for more than 1,300 feet, coiling in a design visible only from above. Countless circular enclosures and geometric embankments once dotted the region so vast that early European settlers mistook them for natural hills. Yet surveys revealed precise mathematics octagons aligned to lunar cycles, squares aligned to solstices. Were these ceremonial centres or markers in some forgotten grid, then the star forts of Europe and beyond? At first glance, they are military fortifications of the Renaissance, designed for defence against cannon fire, but from the air they take on another quality, perfect mandalas of geometry. 10-pointed stars, fractal bastions, moats forming concentric rings. They appear across continents: Italy, the Netherlands, India, even the Americas, built by different nations yet nearly identical in design. Defensive logic explains some of it. But why the aesthetic perfection? Why the sense of symbolic order? Some researchers suggest the forts were not only bastions of war but machines of energy, their moats and walls channeling currents of air, water, even magnetism. And then there are the geoglyphs of Central Asia and Russia, massive squares, crosses and wheels carved into the steppe. Only discovered in recent decades thanks to satellite imagery, they suggest that the builders never expected to see their work completed from the ground. They built for an aerial eye long before balloons or planes. This raises an unsettling question. Who was the intended viewer? Did ancient people build as offerings to gods in the heavens? Did they hope to be remembered by eyes in the sky, or did they somehow possess means of flight themselves? Hot air gliders, or even technologies now lost to us. Even cities themselves reveal patterns when viewed from above. Washington, D.C., laid out in the 18th century, forms intricate geometric alignments, pentagrams, compass roses, interlocking axes. St. Petersburg, central to Tartarian theories, unfurls in star-like radiations from its heart. Paris, Versailles and Rome follow similar radial designs. Seen from the ground they are beautiful, seen from the air they are sigils. The aerial perspective invites a chilling possibility. Perhaps these patterns were not decorative or symbolic at all. Perhaps they were functional, meant to resonate with forces only measurable across miles. Cities as circuits, forts as resonators, landscapes as coded texts as legible only to those who could look down from the sky. If so, then our modern rediscovery by drone and satellite is not progress but memory reawakening, a way of seeing once common now forgotten. If the earth holds the memory of vanished civilizations in its stones and walls, could the body carry the memory in its bones and blood? The theory of Tartaria and other forgotten cultures often circles back to a haunting claim that the people of those worlds may not have been like us, not entirely. Consider the persistent stories of giant skeletons unearthed across the world. Newspaper clippings from the 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in North America, describe skeletons ranging from 7 to 12 feet tall, often discovered in ancient burial mounds. Many were said to have double rows of teeth, elongated skulls, or features unlike any known tribe. Mainstream archaeology attributes these reports to exaggerations, hoaxes, or misidentifications. Yet the sheer number of accounts, dozens from respected local papers, keeps the whispers alive. If true, they suggest that ancient builders may have been larger, stronger, perhaps adapted to a different world. Then there are the anomalous skulls. In Peru, the Paracas skulls are elongated not just by cultural binding but by volume cranial capacity up to 25% larger than normal, with sutures unlike typical human skulls. Across Europe and Asia, dolichocephalic skulls appear in ancient graves, as if some lineages carried traits we no longer see. Were these simply natural variations or remnants of a population unlike any we know? Modern science adds another thread. Genetic studies sometimes reveal unexplained fragments of DNA, so-called ghost lineages, that do not match Neanderthal, Denisovan, or modern human. They appear as echoes in our genomes, suggesting interbreeding with other, now vanished hominins. Most interpretations stay within accepted evolutionary science. But in fringe circles, these ghost traces are seen as the fingerprints of forgotten civilizations, peoples who were not primitive cousins but advanced contemporaries. Even myths recall strange bloodlines. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim giants, born of the union between the sons of God and daughters of men. Sumerian myths describe the Anunnaki beings who fashioned humans as workers. Norse sagas speak of Jötnar the giants who shaped the world. Could these stories encode dim memories of peoples biologically distinct now erased or blended into us? The question is more than academic. If Tartaria or similar civilizations existed, and if their erasure was not just cultural but genetic, then we may carry fragments of their legacy inside us. In bone density and bloodlines, in rare genetic traits, whispers of a people written out of history, but not entirely erased. What makes this possibility unsettling is not only the suggestion of difference, but of deliberate forgetting. Were these lineages outcompeted naturally, or erased systematically as inconvenient rivals to a new human order? If so, the suppression of Tartaria was not only on maps and monuments, but in bodies themselves. And yet, traces remain. A skull in a museum drawer, a photograph of an oversized femur, a stray line of day that doesn't quite fit. Clues that, if followed, could redraw not only our history, but our sense of what it means to be human. If stone crumbles and bones decay, what else endures words? Not etched into monuments, but carried in voices, mother to child, elder to apprentice, traveller to stranger at the fire. When civilizations fall, their last survivors often turn to storytelling as the arc for memory. And sometimes what we call myth is simply history wrapped in metaphor. Across the world, oral traditions preserve echoes of disasters and peoples long gone. The most famous are the flood myths. Over 200 cultures, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the Norse tale of Bergelmir to the Hopi stories of waters rising, speak of a deluge that swept the earth. Mainstream scholars see these as cultural memories of regional floods. But what if they are fractured recollections of a global reset, an echo of catastrophes like the Younger Dryas meltwaters, or the supposed mud flood that erased Tartaria fairy tales too often, carry strangely specific motifs? Castles buried under hills, cities sunk beneath the waves, giants who once roamed the land, sleeping kings who will awaken when their nations are in need. To children they are wonders, to historians of myth they may be encrypted records, the only way fragile knowledge could cross centuries of suppression. Consider the dreamlike tales of Ireland where whole peoples, the Tuatha Dé Danann, are said to have retreated underground into mounds and hills when newcomers arrived. To folklore they became the fairies. To archaeology, those mounds are megalithic tombs far older than the Celts who told the stories. Did the myths preserve a memory of a displaced people folded into legend, Or take the indigenous legends of North America, which speak of giant beings who built mounds, raised structures, and warred with humans before vanishing. Early European settlers dismissed these as fantasy, yet the very soil of the continent is filled with vast earthworks, many destroyed before they were studied. Whether giants' allegories or memories of cultures erased before history began recording, even in children's tales, fragments linger. The Pied Piper leading away children beneath the hill, Atlantis sinking beneath the sea, the Sleeping Beauty sealed away until the right time. Such patterns repeat across continents, across tongues, as though the same core memory has been retold until it became a bedtime story. And perhaps that is the only way forbidden knowledge could survive. If Tartaria or any erased civilization once flourished, its memory might not lie in official records. Those can be burned maps, redrawn monuments, basements buried. Instead, it may drift through lullabies, chants, and fables hidden in plain sight. It raises an unsettling possibility that when we laugh at fairy tales, we are laughing at the broken mirror of our own past, our ancestors whispering through allegory, hoping that one day we would remember. Hey guys, if this moment speaks to you, give it a like and subscribe, only if it feels right in your heart. And share with me, where are you listening right now and what time does your clock read? It would mean a lot to read your words. If myths are whispers, artifacts are shouts that should not exist. Scattered across the world are objects that refuse to fit the neat boxes of history. Archaeologists call them ooh-ooh parts, out-of-place artifacts. To skeptics, they are mistakes, hoaxes, or coincidences. To others, they are smoking guns of forgotten worlds. Take the Baghdad battery discovered in the 1930s. Clay jars with copper cylinders and iron rods inside dating back over 2,000 years. To conventional archaeology, they were mundane storage vessels, yet when filled with acidic juice, they produce a weak electrical current. Was this an ancient experiment in electrochemistry, a tool for plating metals? Or a hint that electricity was once part of human craft long before Edison's wires lit the night? Then there are the crystal lenses of Nimrud carved 3,000 years ago in Assyria. To a casual glance, they are just polished stones, but when tested, they magnify like glass lenses. Did the ancients know of optics, telescopes, microscopes knowledge? We tell ourselves was only unlocked in the Renaissance, and stranger still, there are anomalies entombed in stone itself. Reports circulate of metallic spheres found in South African rock strata over 2 billion years old. Grooved and shaped with uncanny precision, they should not exist in that timeline. Or the Koso artifact, a spark plug-like object allegedly encased in solid rock dated hundreds of thousands of years old. Each case is debated, often dismissed, but each raises the same unease. How can a human-made object be older than humanity itself? Even tools have appeared where they shouldn't. In 19th century coal mines, miners reported finding chains, hammers, and metallic vases sealed within seams of rock millions of years old. Were these misidentifications, or are we glimpsing a cycle of civilizations, human or not, that rose and fell before ours? And then there is the puzzle of metallurgy. The iron pillar of Delhi, standing for 100 years without rusting in the open air, defies the corrosion we expect. In parts of South America, Incan smiths worked alloys that modern metallurgy struggles to replicate. Did they inherit formulas from a lineage deeper than we remember? For mainstream history, these artifacts are awkward outliers, explained away as curiosities, but if viewed together, they form a pattern, like scattered puzzle pieces from a picture we are not supposed to see. A picture of technology remembered, forgotten, and remembered again. Perhaps the strangest thought is this: what we call invention might sometimes be reinvention. Maybe our ancestors or someone before them once walked the same path of discovery, only to have the earth itself close over their story, leaving behind a few stubborn relics that whisper, "We were here first." If the out-of-place artifacts tease us with glimpses of forgotten civilizations, then the hollow earth theories fling the door wide open. They suggest not just the loss of knowledge, but the concealment of entire worlds hidden beneath our feet. Across cultures, myths speak of vast realms below. The Greeks told of Hades. The Norse imagined Svartalfheim and Hell. Native American traditions whisper of people who survived cataclysms by retreating underground, guided by spirit beings into safe caverns. Tibetan lore describes Agartha, a radiant subterranean kingdom linked by tunnels to the surface. By the 17th and 18th centuries, as science and exploration reshaped Europe, these myths hardened into theories. Edmund Halley, the astronomer, best known for the comet that bears his name, proposed in 1692 that Earth might be composed of concentric shells, hollow layers capable of housing hidden life, and even inner suns. Later explorers like John Cleves Sims Jr. declared that the poles were gateways into these inner worlds. He lobbied the US government to send expeditions north to prove it, and though the expeditions never found great entrances to another world, curious reports persisted. Hollow caverns deep in Siberia, enormous tunnel systems in South America, and legends of vast underground cities in Cappadocia, Turkey, where hundreds of rooms, ventilation shafts, and entire communities were carved into volcanic rock safe from invasion and perhaps from catastrophe above. The further science probed, the stranger things became. Modern spelunkers have discovered caves stretching for hundreds of mile systems so vast that we have mapped only fragments. Some chambers are cathedral-sized with rivers, lakes, and ecosystems untouched by human eyes. What might still lie sealed in stone undisturbed for thousands of years? The hollow earth. Theories in their wilder forms imagine civilizations untouched by time, peoples who survived surface floods, plagues, or resets by moving into the deep earth. In more sober terms, they reflect a psychological truth. The ground itself feels alive with memory. Every tunnel, every catacomb beneath a city, every mine shaft that breaks open an unexpected void seems like an echo of that deeper suspicion. What if we're not the first to dig here? Skeptics dismiss Hollow Earth stories as fantasy. Yet even they admit Earth's crust hides mysteries. Vast portions of it remain unexplored. Ancient tunnels exist whose purpose and builders are forgotten. Entire lost histories could lie only a few hundred feet beneath us. And so the Hollow Earth is less a theory than a metaphor, a reminder that beneath every civilization runs the question of what lies unseen, what lies forgotten. It may not be a kingdom of light under our feet, but it may be the memory of one. If the Hollow Earth myths invite us to imagine entire civilizations hidden under our feet, then archaeology gives us glimpses of something tantalizingly close, real cities swallowed by time, buried in earth, sand, and sea. Take Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, Turkey. Discovered when a villager knocked through a wall in his basement in the 1960s, it revealed a sprawling underground city that could shelter as many as 20,000 people. With stables, kitchens, chapels, and ventilation shafts reaching 8 levels deep, it was no mere hideout. It was a world beneath a world, its existence forgotten, until chance reopened its doors. Across the ocean, in the jungles of Guatemala, LiDAR scanning has peeled back the canopy to reveal a vast hidden Maya metropolis. Tens of thousands of previously unknown structures, causeways, pyramids, defensive walls, canals. An entire network of cities once thought to be isolated is now revealed as a connected civilization hidden beneath centuries of vines and roots. In the desert sands of Egypt, the lost city of Tanis, immortalized in legend as the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, was buried and preserved under shifting dunes, while in Iraq, parts of Nineveh and Babylon still sleep beneath layers of soil only partially excavated. Then there are the cities beneath water. Pavlopetri in Greece, dating back to around 3000 BCE, lies just a few meters under the sea, with streets, courtyards, and buildings laid out much like a modern town. Off the coast of India near Dwarka, divers have found submerged ruins stretching for miles, sparking debate about whether they represent a city swallowed by the ocean thousands of years ago. And in the Bay of Campeche, Mexico, sonar scans have hinted at geometric structures deep below the Gulf waters, though debate rages over whether they are natural or man-made. Each discovery whispers the same truth: civilizations vanish. Some by war, others by plague, many by the slow, steady burial of earth and sea. When they are gone, they leave only faint traces as a mound in the desert, a ripple on a jungle floor, a fisherman's tale of stones under the waves. If cities can disappear so completely that even their memory vanishes for thousands of years, then the question of Tartaria takes on a sharper edge. Could a civilization be erased, not just by conquest and renaming, but by being buried alive, hidden under layers of time, until only stories remain? The pattern is there: underground cities, jungle cities, desert cities, ocean cities. Again and again, humanity builds, loses, and forgets. The earth swallows and the earth keeps silent. But not forever. For each generation, the ground gives up a little more of its secret. For as long as humans have sought shelter, they have turned to caves. But caves were never only places to hide from storms or predators. Again and again across continents and millennia, caves became sanctuaries, gateways into the underworld wombs of stone where humanity whispered to its gods and ancestors. The first signs are painted in ochre and charcoal. Deep in Lascaux and Chauvet in France, hunters crept miles underground to paint herds of bison, lions, and horses by the flicker of flame. These were not crude doodles. They were ceremonies images meant to invoke luck, fertility, and the power of the hunt. To step into the cave was to step into another world, where the stone itself seemed to breathe. In India's Ajanta and Ellora caves, entire cathedrals were carved straight into living rock. Pillars, domes, sanctuaries, all hewn from stone with a precision that defies imagination. At Ellora's Kailasa temple, workers removed more than 200,000 tons of basalt to reveal a monolithic shrine, one continuous piece of rock sculpted into the likeness of Mount Kailash, home of the gods. To stand there is to stand in a cathedral not built but revealed as though the mountain itself wished to be holy. China tells the same story. At Longmen and Mogao, thousands of Buddha statues glow from cliff walls, some towering over 50 feet, others so small they fit in a hand. Entire libraries of stone, their surfaces etched with sutras and prayers. These were not only art galleries, they were repositories of memory, carved to last beyond paper, beyond dynasties. Even in Europe, Christianity once met the underground. The catacombs of Rome stretch for hundreds of miles with crypts, frescoes, and symbols of faith painted in the half-light. Early Christians prayed among the tombs, turning death into a threshold for rebirth. And in Cappadocia's volcanic tufa, the same region that hides Derinkuyu, soft stone became honeycombed with chapels and monasteries. Crosses etched into ceilings, frescoes of saints' altars worn smooth by centuries of hands. These were caves turned into cathedrals, sanctuaries that merged earth with heaven. Why caves? Perhaps because they were already liminal half-worlds between surface and depth, womb and tumas, between life and death. To enter was to descend into mystery, to leave behind the ordinary, and touch something eternal. Some theorists suggest that what we see as sacred caves might also preserve echoes of older civilizations, that the choice to carve deep underground was not only spiritual but practical, preserving knowledge, hiding relics, sheltering survivors of past cataclysms. When a flood, a war, or even a mud wave swept the surface clean, what lay below could endure. Which raises the unsettling question, are the world's caves merely natural sanctuaries of the human spirit, or are they vaults, stone cathedrals holding the last whispers of forgotten worlds? For centuries, caves and the deep earth belonged to myth. They were entrances to Hades, the homes of dragons or the sleeping places of gods. But in the last 200 years, a new kind of explorer has taken the torch, then the headlamp, and stepped into the dark. Not priests or storytellers, but splunkers, geologists and scientists armed with rope sonar and scanning technology. The first thing they discovered is scale. The Krubera Cave in Georgia plunges more than 7,200 feet below the surface, so deep that descending takes weeks with camps established inside the earth. In Mexico's Sistemas Cave, explorers have mapped labyrinths stretching over 50 miles of tunnels, with drops so sheer they vanish into double darkness. These are not minor cracks, they are worlds beneath our own vast, enough to humble even seasoned climbers. But descent is not only physical. Modern science probes the hidden layers of the earth with instruments sharper than eyes. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic scans, and muon tomography, cosmic particles that slip through stone allow scientists to peer into pyramids, volcanoes, even beneath cities. In Egypt's Great Pyramid, muons revealed cavities no one had entered in 4,000 years. Were they storage chambers, ritual voids, or something we no longer understand? Geology adds another layer. Rock strata become a library of the Earth's past fossils, ash layers, sudden shifts that tell of floods and cataclysms. In some places, layers appear out of order, jumbled as though the Earth itself once liquefied. The same strange patterns that fuel theories of mudfloods are also the subject of mainstream debates. Quick clays, landslides, earthquakes that can swallow a house whole in seconds. Spelunkers, meanwhile, bring back stories that blur the line between science and myth. The Nika Crystal Cave in Mexico holds selenite crystals 30 feet long, shimmering like frozen pillars of light. Temperatures soar past 120 degrees, humidity nears 100%, and yet, inside this alien world, life exists. Bacteria sealed in fluid inclusions dormant for tens of thousands of years, revived when scientists drilled the crystals. Even our cities are not immune. urban archaeologists in London, Paris, and New York descend into forgotten tunnels and catacombs, uncovering entire layers of infrastructure beneath the streets. Subway workers sometimes stumble on bones, brick chambers, or vaults no one remembers building. The ground beneath our feet is not solid. It is layered with stories, some written, some still sealed. Technology makes the descent safer, but it doesn't erase the awe. Whether in the boots of a caver dangling from a rope, or in the data stream of a particle detector, the message is the same: the Earth holds far more than we have yet uncovered, and always the same thought hovers. If there are worlds beneath vast enough to hide life knowledge, even entire cities, what else waits in the dark, unseen, untouched, patiently enduring? The deeper we descend, the more the lines blur between science and story. For while explorers bring back maps and scans, myth has long placed sentinels at the mouth of the Earth, warnings carved in tale and ritual reminders that not every door should be opened. Across cultures we find a striking pattern. Caves, chasms, and hidden entrances are not simply voids but thresholds, and thresholds are guarded. In ancient Greece, the gates of Hades were watched by Cerberus, the three-headed hound whose very form was a warning that passage was not meant for mortals. The Norse spoke of dwarves and Jotun who stood at subterranean forges, masters of metals too strange for men. In China, local legends tell of dragon-guarded caves whose treasures could only be approached by those with pure intent or not at all. The motif is repeated in Christian Europe, where monks warned of demon-haunted caverns that opened during earthquakes, swallowing whole villages as punishment for sin. In Ireland, away in Agat, the Cave of Cats was said to be an entrance to the otherworld guarded by beasts and spirits that emerged on Samhain when the veil was thin. To step inside was to risk never returning unchanged. These guardians and curses often seem exaggerated stories meant to frighten children or keep wanderers safe from dangerous ground. And yet when modern spelunkers crawl into unexplored shafts, they sometimes find chambers filled with ancient marking, spirals, handprints, or carved figures that appear to stand watch. In France's Chauvet Cave, paintings of lions and bears face the entrance like eternal sentinels. Were they decoration or guardians drawn in pigment warnings for those who came after them? Archaeologists note another curious detail: blocked tunnels. In sites from Cappadocia's underground cities to Native American mound complexes, certain passages were intentionally sealed with boulders or bricked over. The reason is rarely clear. Were they structural or were they warnings? Do not pass, the ancient equivalent of a locked door. And then there are the curses, inscribed in tombs and vaults across Egypt. Mesopotamia and the Americas are threats against intruders. Death shall come on swift wings, he who enters shall not return. We often read them as superstition, but they mirror the same structure as myth: a threshold, a guardian, a price for transgression. Perhaps myths of guardians are not about monsters at all. Perhaps they are cultural memories of real danger, toxic gases, unstable stone microbes long dormant in darkness. Or perhaps they are the echo of something else, knowledge too dangerous or too powerful to let just anyone pass. In either case, the warning lingers. Step across and you are no longer in the world you knew. If caves are thresholds, then it is little wonder that faith has so often taken root beneath the earth. Across time and cultures, we find that when people sought the divine, they did not always look upward toward the heavens. Just as often they turned downward into the womb of the earth, where silence, darkness, and stone could cradle their rituals. The most famous examples are the catacombs of Rome. In the early centuries of Christianity, when persecution made worship dangerous, believers descended into miles of tunnels carved in tufa rock. By lamplight, they held secret gatherings, painted walls with fish and doves, and whispered prayers among the tombs of their martyrs. These spaces were not merely hiding places, they were sanctuaries, churches below the city carved in defiance of empire. But Christianity was not alone. In Cappadocia, Central Turkey, entire underground cities Derinkuyu, Kaymaklı were cut from volcanic rock. Scholars say they were defensive refuges, but evidence suggests chapels and sanctuaries were among the first chambers dug. The people carved crosses into ceilings, altars into walls, and baptistries in hidden rooms where only the initiated could enter. Further east, the Ajanta caves of India hold Buddhist monasteries and temples carved by hand into basalt cliffs. Within their stone halls, monks painted vast murals of the Buddha's life illuminated only by oil lamps. The echoing chants and flicker of flame transform these caverns into cosmic replicas of enlightenment wombs of meditation cut into the heart of rock. In the Andes, legends tell of tunnels beneath Cusco, some said to lead from the Coricancha the Temple of the Sun to hidden chambers where Inca priests guarded sacred relics, and in Ethiopia the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela were dug not downward, but into the ground, entire cathedrals sunken below the surface, as if to merge heaven and earth in stone. The pattern is unmistakable. When humanity reached for its gods, it often sought the deep. Darkness was not absence, but presence. The earth was not tyrant, but sacred. What is striking too is how often these subterranean sanctuaries echo one another. The same motif spirals crosses stars emerge in caves separated by oceans. Some scholars argue this is simple coincidence, symbols born of human imagination. Others suggest a deeper continuity, that faith below ground is part of a legacy stretching back before history, a memory of when the ancestors of all peoples first sought the sacred in the caverns of prehistory. Perhaps what they found in that darkness was more than fear. Perhaps they found something so powerful that they carried it forward from Paleolithic shamans to Christian martyrs, from Buddhist monks to hidden sects, a subterranean chain of faith linking ages and cultures. When you stand in the shadowed corridors of Derinkuyu, the underground city in Cappadocia, you cannot help but ask a question: how did they do this? By modern measure, the complex sprawls downward through multiple stories, living quarters, stables, ventilation shafts, wells, even chapels carved entirely by hand into volcanic rock. Engineers today marvel at its scale. The air shafts are so well placed that fresh air circulates even deep underground. Some tunnels align in ways that make them resistant to collapse, as if their builders understood principles of geology and architecture far ahead of their time. This is not an isolated marvel. Across the world, the underground whispers the same riddle. In Ellora, India, the Kailasa temple was carved from a single mountain, a monolith hollowed into a soaring cathedral. Modern engineers admit they struggle to imagine how it was achieved. Tens of thousands of tons of rock, removed with precision, leaving behind soaring columns and intricate reliefs. To hollow downward in such a way without collapsing would challenge even today's construction methods. In Egypt, beneath the pyramids and the plateau of Giza, lie vast networks of tunnels and chambers. Some are finished with perfect right angles, as if cut by machines. In Malta, the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni descends 3 levels into limestone, a subterranean labyrinth with acoustic properties so unique that a single chant can reverberate like an organ note. Even in Europe, the underground offers mysteries. The Paris catacombs stretch for hundreds of miles, but before they became ossuaries, many of the passages were ancient quarries carved with astonishing uniformity. Who first cut them? And how far back does the digging truly go? Skeptics argue there is nothing mysterious. These were feats of patience, not lost technology. Hammer chisel and determination could given centuries achieve wonders. But others suggest the precision of angles, the uniformity of cuts and the mastery of acoustics hint at something more, that these builders possessed an engineering tradition we no longer remember. What makes the question even more haunting is the possibility of connection. The same features appear in cultures with no known contact ventilation shafts in Turkey echo those in Peru's Sacsayhuaman tunnels. Acoustic chambers in Malta resonate like those in Central America. Repeating forms and methods appear again and again, as if echoes of a single forgotten blueprint ripple across time. Perhaps these are the true fingerprints of a civilization that vanished, its knowledge carried underground, preserved in stone awaiting rediscovery. And each time a modern engineer admits quietly that we would struggle to reproduce these works even now that echo grows louder. For centuries, the underground was a place of imagination, its secrets revealed only when miners stumbled on a cavern or when ruins happened to collapse into view. But in our own time, a quiet revolution has begun. We now have eyes that can see beneath the earth. Consider the jungles of Guatemala. For decades, archaeologists hacked through vines and soil, uncovering Maya pyramids one by one. But in 2018, a team turned to LiDAR light detection and ranging a laser that scans the ground from above, stripping away the trees in digital space. What they found was staggering: more than 60,000 hidden structures. Pyramids, causeways, fortresses, and entire civilizations still lying there, concealed beneath the forest canopy. What was once thought to be scattered kingdoms revealed itself as a sprawling, interconnected world. The same technology has rewritten maps in Cambodia, where LiDAR revealed that Angkor Wat was just the heart of a vast urban grid hidden beneath centuries of jungle. In South America, LiDAR is uncovering massive geoglyphs, roads, and city plans, expanding the outlines of civilizations once thought small. And it isn't only jungles. Ground-penetrating radar GPR is now being used to peer beneath deserts, fields, and even city streets. At Stonehenge, GPR has revealed a hidden complex of pit ditches and structures beneath the grass, suggesting the iconic stones are only the surface marker of a much larger sacred landscape. In Egypt, radar scans beneath the sands of Saqqara have mapped entire necropolises yet to be fully excavated. Then there are the caves and tunnels long dismissed as natural voids. High-resolution 3D scans show evidence of tool marks, artificial shaping, or unexplained geometries. Some researchers wonder if we're only scratching the surface of what lies beneath our cities, our mountains, our oceans. The tools of exploration are growing stranger still. Muon tomography, which uses cosmic particles to X-ray through stone, has already discovered hidden chambers in the Great Pyramid of Giza rooms sealed for 400–500 years whose purpose is still unknown. Drones and robotic crawlers are mapping tunnels no human could reach. Even satellites peering at tiny variations in soil and vegetation reveal the faint scars of ancient walls and buried roads. And yet the deeper our vision grows, the more the mystery expands. For every city mapped, a larger one looms beneath. For every hidden chamber revealed, more questions wait in the dark. These technologies suggest a sobering truth: we have not yet begun to know the true depth of our past. The frontier of exploration is no longer across oceans or over mountains, it is directly beneath our feet. And as our tools grow sharper, the Earth's silence grows thinner, yielding secrets once thought lost forever. What does it mean to learn that the Earth is layered not just with stone but with memory, that for every city we build another may one day be forgotten, swallowed, waiting for rediscovery? The revelations of the past decades, LiDAR maps of buried cities, radar scans of hidden chambers, muon images of sealed voids are not only about the ancient world. They are also a mirror held up to us. They remind us that civilizations are fragile, that what seems permanent can in a few centuries be reduced to dust roots and silence. Think of the flood myths that whisper across cultures. Once dismissed as stories, they now echo in geological records of rising seas and sudden climate shifts. Think of the ruins beneath oceans, the drowned temples off India's coast, the sunken stonework off Yonaguni in Japan. If whole cities could vanish, then why not now? Rising seas again threaten the shorelines where billions of us live. Future archaeologists may one day find glass towers lying beneath silt, the traces of our age as strange to them as pyramids are to us. We imagine ourselves as unique, but the cycle is old growth, collapse, burial, rediscovery. The very technologies that allow us to peer into the past also offer a glimpse into the long arc of the future. If ancient peoples once built on a scale that could only be understood from the sky, what will our highways and megacities look like when reduced to faint lines beneath a jungle canopy? If they encoded myths as memory, what stories will survive of us when our data is gone, our servers erased? Perhaps this is the humbling lesson of all the anomalies: the stone too heavy, the tunnels too deep, the myths too persistent. Not that there was one lost civilization, but that civilizations themselves are always in danger of being lost. Each age is a layer, each city a fossil in waiting. And so when we look at the mysteries of Tartaria, or the great flood myths, or the star-shaped forts only visible from above, we may be glimpsing not only what came before, but what may come after. The deep past and the deep future touch in this realization we too will be buried. Perhaps not under mud floods or glaciers, but under time itself. And one day someone will peel back the earth, scan the soil, rid our ruins like riddles, and wonder what we forgot to remember. Part 25, Tunguska and the Siberian Core. At dawn on June 30th, 1908, the skies above central Siberia tore open. Witnesses spoke of a fireball brighter than the sun, a shockwave that flattened 80 million trees across more than 2,000 square kilometers, and a night sky that glowed so bright in Europe that people could read newspapers at midnight. We know it as the Tunguska event, the largest explosion in recorded history. Conventional science explains it as an asteroid or comet fragment that entered the atmosphere and detonated before impact. No crater because nothing struck the ground, just airburst fire and devastation. But for those who follow the trails of Tartaria, the question lingers: why here? Why in the Siberian heartland, once mapped with strange star forts and rumoured to be a seat of forgotten power? Some speculate Tunguska was no random visitor from space. Could it have been the failure of a buried energy device, a remnant of the fabled power grid cities we glimpsed in earlier chapters? Local legends spoke of fire from the earth long before 1908. The Evenki people told stories of a god's forge beneath the soil, a place where the sky could burn. Others point to curious anomalies, trees that did not burn though they were blasted flat. Radiation spikes in the soil, unexplained by mere impact. A strange magnetic pulse reported by telegraph operators across Europe at the exact moment of detonation. If the Tartarian Empire truly mastered energy wireless power harmonic resonance architecture as circuitry, then Tunguska begins to look less like chance and more like a system collapsing on itself. A runaway discharge. A core meltdown in a network whose last spark still flickered beneath the Siberian tundra. Even today, Russian expeditions to the Tunguska zone describe an eerie stillness. Compasses spin, plants mutate, locals call it the place where the earth breathed fire. So what was Tunguska? A comet from deep space. A test of technology we cannot name, or the last gasp of a forgotten civilization, its final heartbeat shaking the sky. What we can say is this. Tunguska remains an open wound in the Earth's memory, and perhaps in the look long enough at the pages of modern history and certain disasters begin to rhyme. Lisbon, 1755. A day when the city of philosophers and merchants was swallowed by quakefire and tsunami in a single morning, wiping out libraries, records, cathedrals, and tens of thousands of lives. Europe's age of reason trembled not only in stone, but in certainty. London, 1606. The Great Fire swept through the medieval core, reducing centuries of crooked streets, guild halls, and churches to ash. In its place rose the new geometry of Christopher Wren's city, a reset that many claimed was far too swift, far too complete to be only accident. Chicago, 1871. One dry night, flames leapt across wooden rooftops, consuming a metropolis that had risen too quickly. In just 2 days, the heart of the city was gone. Out of the ashes came a new grid of steel and stone modern Chicago. San Francisco, 1906. An earthquake toppled buildings, but it was fire that finished the job. Whole districts erased, records lost. And in the rebuilding, a new civic order, taller, stronger, and suspiciously uniform. Taken one by one, they are tragedies, natural or accidental, the unpredictable violence of earth and flame. But taken together, they form a pattern of resets. Cities reduced to cinders only to be remade as though by design, wider boulevards, taller structures, centralized planning, new control. Historians see progress. Conspiracy watchers see something else, the hand of an invisible architect clearing away the old to lay new foundations. Lisbon was not just an earthquake, it was the death of an age. London was not just a fire, it was the birth of the financial capital. Chicago was not just disaster, it was the proving ground for steel and skyscraper. San Francisco was not just tremor and blaze, it was the gateway to empire rebuilt on command. Could these natural catastrophes have been engineered resets? Lightning rods for energies we do not yet understand? Orchestrated demolitions hidden behind smoke and flame? If so, then destruction itself becomes a tool, a way to overwrite memory, erase inconvenient layers and rebuild the world in new image. The question is not whether cities will burn. The question is who lights the match and why. Not all resets come with fire and stone. Some come silently in the breath. In 1918, as the First World War ended, a new terror swept the globe, the Spanish flu. It struck not the weak or the old, but the young and the strong, soldiers just returned from the trenches, factory workers, mothers and fathers in their prime. In a single year, as many as 50 million lives were extinguished, more than the war itself had claimed. The strange part, its timing. A global war had shattered empires, redrawn borders, and left populations weary. Then came the virus, finishing what the war had not, hollowing out communities, breaking resistance, ensuring that whatever world emerged on the far side would not look like the one before. But 1918 was only the most recent echo. The Black Death 14th century erased up to half of Europe, collapsing feudal orders and paving the way for new economies, new powers, and new religions of control. The plague of Justinian 6th century scythed through the Eastern Roman Empire, weakening Byzantium at the very moment it might have reconquered the Old West. Smallpox in the Americas 10th century arrived with the conquistadors reducing civilizations of millions to scattered remnants, clearing the land for conquest and colonization. Each time the world did not merely grieve, it transformed. So a darker question lingers: were these pandemics purely natural cycles of disease or something more deliberate? Were they engineered resets, tools of culling designed to weaken populations tied to an old order? ensuring only survivors shaped by the new powers would remain. Modern eyes might see this in whispers of biological warfare, records of medieval armies flinging plague-ridden corpses over city walls, rumours that smallpox blankets were distributed to native populations, the eerie fact that the 1918 virus seemed to vanish as suddenly as it came, its origin still debated. Whether by nature or by hand, pandemics act like fire in the bloodstream, burning away the old world and forcing a rebirth. When they pass, they leave behind not only new graves but new societies, new rulers, new structures of power. And if resets are not only architectural but biological, then history itself is a story written not only in stone and ash but in the fragile code of flesh. The question remains, were these plagues accidents of nature or designs of a hidden architect? In the 19th century, across the newly civilized lands of America, an odd spectacle unfolded. Trains packed with children, thousands upon thousands of them, rolled out of eastern cities carrying the young westward into the open country. They were called orphan trains, said to be filled with street urchins from New York, Chicago and Boston, sent to be adopted by farm families in need of help. Between the 1850s and 1920s, nearly 250,000 children were relocated this way, the largest movement of children in recorded history. The official story. These were the unwanted of industrial cities, children of poverty, disease and neglect rescued from slums and given new homes. But anomalies creep in. Photographs show rows of children eerily uniform, strangely blank-eyed, sometimes too well dressed for the destitute origins claimed for them. Records of parents or families are scarce, often non-existent. Names were changed, origins erased. Even stranger, many of these children were sent to towns and cities that census records suggest were nearly empty urban shells with grand architecture but little population. Could these orphans have been more than waifs? Could they have been the new inhabitants of depopulated Tartarian cities repopulating the vast ornate urban landscapes whose original builders had been erased? The whispers go further still. In the late 19th century, a bizarre cultural meme appeared: Cabbage Patch Babies. Illustrated cards, dolls and stories depicted infants plucked from gardens or manufactured in mysterious ways. It was treated as whimsy, but some see it as mockery or coded memory, children appearing from nowhere supplied like stock to fill a new civilization. The pattern is unsettling. Empty cities in America and beyond filled suddenly in the mid-19th century. Vast state-run orphan asylums overflowing with children no one remembers giving birth to. The manufactured baby myth circulating just as orphan trains reached their peak. Were these coincidences of industrial-age poverty and propaganda, or were they the final stage of a reset program, remove the old population through disaster, then seed the rebuilt cities with a generation whose origins could never be traced? If true, then the very bloodlines of the present carry the imprint of that silence, children without pasts raised to inherit a world without memory. As the orphan trains thundered west, another layer of the story appears not in government records or official histories but in the shadows of fraternal orders. The Independent Order of Oddfellows IOF was founded in the early 1800s, spreading rapidly across America and the British world. At its height, the Oddfellows rivaled even the Freemasons, with thousands of lodges in nearly every city and town. Their mission on the surface was charity, to care for widows and orphans, to bury the dead, to maintain brotherhood. And indeed, they built orphan asylums across the country, vast complexes where the children of the orphan train era were often sent. But the Oddfellows architecture raises questions. Their lodges were often outsized for their towns, built in the style of Roman temples or medieval cathedrals. Symbolic imagery, all-seeing eyes, globes, chains, coffins, hourglasses adorned their halls, echoing ancient mystery cults. Some lodges even contained underground chambers or windowless ritual rooms, as though secrecy itself were part of the design. Were the Oddfellows simply benevolent caretakers of orphans, or were they custodians of a deeper program? The whispers say orphans arriving in emptied cities were not only fed and clothed, they were indoctrinated. Through ritual parades and oaths, they were raised in the ethos of the new order. The erased Tartarian past was replaced with a curated history taught in lodge schools and reinforced by state textbooks. The order's motto, friendship, love and truth, sounds harmless, even noble. Yet its very symbols suggest cycles of death and rebirth, binding and loosing memory and amnesia. Were the Oddfellows functioning as gatekeepers of the reset, shaping the children who would inherit cities stripped of their old inhabitants? If the orphan trains provided the bodies, did the odd fellows provide the minds and myths for the new population? And perhaps that explains the architecture why so many of their halls look older than they should be, or bear uncanny resemblance to structures attributed to vanished civilizations. Were they inheritors of that knowledge or simply custodians of its ruins? In this telling, the Oddfellows were not eccentric do-gooders, but the quiet engineers of continuity after a cataclysm, ensuring the reset was not just physical but mental. Everywhere you look, across continents and languages, giants loom in the world's oldest stories. They stride through sagas, scriptures, and fireside tales, always on the border between myth and memory. In the Bible, they are the Nephilim offspring of the sons of God, and the daughters of men described as mighty and of renown. Later, Goliath of Gath becomes their most famous descendant, a warrior so tall that his very defeat serves as proof of divine justice. But even after the flood echoes remain, there were giants in those days. In the Norse sagas, the world begins with the body of a giant. Ymir, slain by Odin and his brothers, is carved into creation. His blood becomes seas, his bones mountains, his skull the vault of the heavens. Even the gods, the Aesir akin to giants, are a reminder that power and monstrosity are never fully separate. In Greek myth, the Titans ruled before the Olympians, vast beings who embodied elemental forces. Their war, the Titanomachy, was not just a mythic struggle, it was a cultural rupture marking the fall of one order and the rise of another. The later Gigantomachy, where giants attempt to storm Olympus itself, reads like a warning: civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and even gods fear being replaced. Among Native American peoples, stories abound of great ones who once roamed the land. The Paiute of Nevada spoke of the Sea-Takar redhead giants who were fierce and cannibalistic. In the Ohio Valley, burial mounds sometimes yielded bones said to be of enormous stature, though such reports have been quietly written off by mainstream archaeology. For the Choctaw, there were Nahullo white-skinned giants who hunted humans. From Celtic Ireland come tales of Fionn MacCumhail, Finn MacCool, whose size and strength blurred the line between hero and giant. Even in Pacific Islands, Polynesian lore tells of colossal builders who raised stone temples before sailing away. The pattern is uncanny: giants as builders leaving behind megaliths ordinary people could never have moved. Giants as foes often destroyed in great wars or floods, giants as ancestors, the bloodline of kings and heroes. Could these stories be fragments of a shared cultural memory? Not mere metaphor, but a remembrance of an earlier race, tall and powerful, perhaps the Tartarian giants, whose bones, when uncovered, are quietly disappeared into museum basements. If myths encode memories, then perhaps these tales are not fables, but last whispers of a time when humans were not alone on the stage. Were these giants wiped out in the Great Resets, or did they fade gradually, leaving only their monuments and their shadows in our stories? The myths agree on one thing: they existed, they fell, and the world after them was smaller. Before Tartaria, before the mud and the resets, there were whispers of older worlds, still civilizations so vast and so advanced that their memory lingers like ghosts across continents. The first name is familiar: Atlantis. Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, places it beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a mighty island empire that challenged Athens and fell in a single day and night of catastrophe. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as allegory, yet others noted Plato's insistence that he was relaying an Egyptian priest's history, not a parable. Was Atlantis a real-world power washed away in flood and fire, remembered only in fragments? Then comes the other name, stranger, but just as haunting Mu. Colonel James Churchward, in the early 20th century, claimed to have studied ancient tablets in India that spoke of a great Pacific continent, a cradle of civilization now sunk beneath the waves. In his retelling, Mu was the mother culture from which Maya Egypt and India all sprang. Scholars scoffed, but Churchward's vision resonated with those who saw global mythic parallels as more than coincidence. And in the 20th century, another voice entered the chorus: Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet. In trance readings, he described Atlantis as a real place destroyed in stages by misuse of advanced energy technologies. He even tied its survivors to the building of pyramids and temples across the world, seeds of later civilizations. What connects these tales to Tartaria? Perhaps this: the idea of successive worlds, each destroyed, each reborn, smaller. Atlantis. Mu, Lemuria, and other lost continents form the deep prelude to Tartaria. a lineage of vanished cultures erased by flood fire or human arrogance. If Tartaria was the last of these great orders, then perhaps it was less an anomaly than part of a pattern of rise and obliteration. Consider Atlantis and Mu, both framed as highly advanced mastering energies or sciences lost to us, both said to be destroyed not only by natural disaster but by hubris and misuse of power. Both remembered through myth vision and suppressed archaeology rather than written history. If true, then Tartaria was not the first erased empire, but simply the last chapter in a longer cycle, a cycle where civilizations reach heights unthinkable to their successors, then collapse, leaving the survivors to stumble forward with only scraps of memory. And so the question sharpens. What comes after us? If we too are a civilization at its peak, are we closer to Mu and Atlantis than we dare admit? Water has always been both giver of life and agent of annihilation. Rivers feed the soil, seas carry trade rains, sustain the harvest. But when waters rise beyond their banks, they do not merely drown bodies, they erase histories. The most enduring of these stories is the biblical flood. In Genesis, mankind's corruption leads to 40 days of rain, and only Noah's Ark rides above the drowned world. For centuries, theologians and explorers alike wondered, was this tale only metaphor? Or did it preserve a cultural memory of an actual flood so great it reshaped civilizations? Elsewhere, echoes abound. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, who survived a flood sent by the gods. In India, texts speak of Manu warned by a fish of the coming waters. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztecs tell of successive worlds destroyed by floods before ours came to be. How is it that cultures oceans apart tell the same story modern geology offers candidates? The Black Sea Deluge. Hypothesis suggests that around 5600 BCE, the Mediterranean broke through the Bosporus, flooding a fertile basin and creating the Black Sea. Archaeologists suspect villages and farmlands lie entombed beneath its waters. In the Americas, evidence points to glacial lake outbursts at the end of the Ice Age. Vast walls of water released as Jesus ice dams collapse, scouring the land clean. And then there is the slow melt of the last ice age, which raised sea levels by more than 120 meters. Coastal cities, if they existed, would now lie deep beneath the waves. Could this explain why so many first civilizations appear already developed? Were they not the beginning, but the survivors of something older, something drowned? This is where the flood myths join hands with the mud flood narratives. In both, entire worlds are swallowed and buried, leaving behind layered ruins and orphaned memories. Floods cleanse with water, mud floods with earth, but the result is the same, a reset, a world forced to begin again, standing on the bones of the last. When we hear of Atlantis swallowed by the Sea of Mu gone beneath the Pacific of Tartaria, buried under inexplicable layers of mud, are these not variations on a single refrain, that civilization is fragile, that the elements themselves conspire to erase, and that what we inherit is never the whole of what came before? The sea has always been a keeper of secrets. Its tides do not only wash away footprints, they bury entire landscapes. And when centuries later we stumble upon their outlines, we are forced to ask how much of history lies drowned. In the waters off Yonaguni, Japan, divers in the 1980s found what looks like a stepped pyramid beneath the waves, terraces, platforms, and flat-cut walls that seem too precise for natural erosion. Some scientists dismiss it as geological happenstance, yet others argue that only human hands could have carved such monumental shapes. If the latter is true, then we are faced with an unsettling truth. The site is at least 10,000 years old, a relic from a time when sea levels were lower and when no such civilization should have existed. Across the globe in the Bahamas, another anomaly lies beneath the turquoise water, the Bimini Road. Stretching half a mile, this arrangement of limestone blocks looks uncannily like a paved path or the foundation of a wall. Mainstream geology insists the stones formed naturally, yet its location right where Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, predicted remnants of Atlantis would be found keeps the site tangled in the web of lost continent lore. Closer to home beneath the North Sea lies Doggerland. Once a vast plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe, it was drowned by rising seas after the Ice Age. Archaeologists dredge up bones, tools, and even evidence of hunting camps, revealing that what is now seafloor was once a thriving land. Doggerland shows us how fragile coastlines can be and how many human stories now lie below the waves. These drowned places are not mere curiosities. They point to a broader pattern: land lost to rising seas, Cities swallowed, civilizations reset. In flood myths and mud flood legends alike, water is the great eraser. When Tartarian narratives speak of a world buried and forgotten, is it not part of this same cycle, the planet covering over the past, only for fragments to resurface when least expected? Perhaps Yonaguni Bimini and Doggerland are not isolated mysteries, but markers, precursors to Tartarian resets, warnings that beneath the earth and under the oceans entire chapters of human history wait in silence, their memory preserved only in myth and stone. Few names echo across so many centuries, so many maps and scriptures as Gog and Magog. They surface in the Bible, in the Quran, in medieval chronicles, and even in the folklore of London. Always shadowy, always ominous invaders from the north, bringers of chaos at the end of days. In the book of Ezekiel, Gog of the land of Magog leads vast armies from the uttermost parts of the north against Israel. In Revelation, they rise again at the end of time, surrounding the faithful in a final war before divine fire consumes them. In Islamic tradition, Ya'juj and Ma'juj are tribes of devastation, locked behind a great barrier until the appointed hour. Wherever they appear, they are symbols of catastrophe, barbarians poised just beyond the frontier of the known world. But where exactly was this frontier medieval Mappaea Mundi? Those great circular maps of Christendom often place Gog and Magog in the far reaches of Scythia or Tartary. Sometimes they are shown walled off by Alexander the Great behind iron gates in the Caucasus. Other times they are sketched as monstrous tribes roaming the empty expanses of Central Asia. To medieval minds, the northeast Tartary was the edge of the map, the waiting ground of apocalypse. Yet the question remains, were Gog and Magog meant to symbolize Tartaria itself, or the enemies that threatened it? Some chroniclers describe them as grotesque giants, possible memories of earlier races subdued or wiped out. Others, especially in Europe, frame them as the archetypal other, the hidden nations in the steppe whose sudden eruption might topple empires. Even stranger, in London's Guildhall, two towering wooden statues stand to this day, Gog and Magog as guardians of the city. Here the apocalyptic invaders have been tamed, transformed into protectors, a reversal that hints at how mutable these figures were. Invaders in one age, wardens in another. For the narrative of Tartaria, Gog and Magog sit at a crossroads. Were they Tartaria's giants, demonized by neighbors who feared their strength, or were they the destroyers who finally brought Tartaria low, leaving only buried cities and broken myths behind? Like so many fragments in this story, Gog and Magog resist easy definition. They may be allegories, they may be history distorted by time, or they may be both warnings of what happens when the walls that divide worlds finally fall. If Tartaria was not merely a kingdom of stone and mortar, but a civilization with knowledge now lost to us, then its greatest secret may not have been walls or towers at all, but doors. Doors not in the sense of wood and hinges, but gateways, thresholds between worlds, dimensions, or eras. In modern fringe research, whispers persist of Tartarian portals, technologies, or constructs that could bend distance or even time. Some point to the architecture itself, arches and keyhole designs repeated across Tartarian-style buildings. Grand triumphal arches orphaned in city squares hint at a function beyond decoration. Could these have once been energetic conduits, their geometry acting as stabilizers for forces we barely understand? Theories multiply when we look at more recent cultural spectacles. At the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, staged at the very edge of Tartary's historic domain opening, ceremonies presented images of giant gates, floating cities, and cosmic journeys. To some, this was no mere artistic flourish, it was symbolism, a veiled nod to the portals of the old world. And then there are the skies of Siberia. For decades, remote stretches of taiga and tundra have reported UFO sightings, glowing orbs, and sudden rifts of light. Local legends often speak of travelers vanishing into mountainsides or reappearing after days with no memory of where they'd been. Could these be echoes of Tartarian gateways still pulsing beneath the surface? Skeptics call it pareidolia or Cold War paranoia. Believers see the pattern, ruined arches scattered across continents. Symbols of stargates in ceremonies staged at the threshold of Tartary itself. Anomalous lights over Siberia, the last frontier of the empire. If Tartaria truly commanded such portals, the implications are staggering. Their sudden collapse or deliberate sealing might explain why entire cities were buried, why orphans had to be redistributed, why maps were rewritten. Not just a fallen kingdom, but a locked world, its gates barred from us. And perhaps that is why the myth of Tartaria lingers so stubbornly, because at its core lies not only the memory of a vanished empire, but the promise or the threat of doors waiting to be reopened. Part 36, the Bermuda Triangle and Beyond. Few mysteries of the modern age grip the imagination quite like the Bermuda Triangle, that stretch of Atlantic between Florida, Bermuda and Puerto Rico where ships vanish without a trace and planes simply disappear from the sky. To most it is an oddity, a puzzle of weather magnetism and human error, but through the lens of Tartarian theory it becomes something else entirely, a scar of broken technology. Researchers note that the triangle is riddled with electromagnetic anomalies. Compasses spin wildly, radio signals distort and instruments fail. Sailors and pilots describe a sudden silence, an oppressive stillness as though reality itself falters. Could these effects be the remnants of Tartarian energy fields once harnessed to power their cities and portals? In this view, the Bermuda Triangle and other global zones of anomaly are not natural hazards but malfunctioning nodes. Imagine an empire that once spanned continents, its energy grid spanning oceans conducted through resonant architecture and geomagnetic lines. If such a system collapsed, its hubs might not vanish neatly. They would linger unstable, tearing at the fabric of the world itself. Disappearances of ships and planes then are not mere accidents but the echoes of portal misfires, gateways opening, briefly sucking craft into spaces we cannot map. The survivors' tales scattered and strange sometimes tell of blinding light, sudden storms or time-slipping strangely minutes becoming hours or vice versa. And the Bermuda Triangle is not alone. The Devil's Sea off Japan, sometimes called the Dragon's Triangle, has a similar reputation with vanished fleets and reports of glowing waters. In Siberia's Yakutia, locals speak of death valleys where compasses fail and travellers vanish. Even the Arctic has its legends of magnetic maelstroms near the pole. Could these be the outposts of Tartaria's broken grid? A planetary system now reduced to dangerous rifts? If so, the triangle is not a freak accident of geography, but a glimpse of what happens when ancient power slips out of balance. And perhaps this is the most haunting thought of all. What if these anomalies are not merely remnants but warnings, signals left behind, reminding us that the Earth itself remembers the last empire that bent its fields and opened its doors, and that we are still walking among the consequences? At first glance, crop circles seem like a modern curiosity, mysterious patterns pressed into fields of wheat and barley appearing overnight under the cover of darkness. Most dismiss them as clever hoaxes, crafted by pranksters with boards and rope. But others insist the precision scale and geometry of these formations defy such simple explanations. Through the Tartarian lens, crop circles take on a far deeper meaning. What if these intricate patterns are not jokes but echoes of a forgotten science? Look closely at the designs, perfect mandalas, spirals, hexagons and interlocking stars. Many align with sacred geometry known across the ancient world, shapes carved into temples, laid into cathedral floors, mirrored in the heavens themselves. The suggestion arises that crop circles are not random at all, but encoded blueprints, maps of resonance energy once harnessed by the Tartarian Empire. Some researchers point to the uncanny mathematical ratios embedded in the circles. Pi the golden ratio. Astronomical alignments all appear in stalks bent but not broken, woven into patterns as if by invisible heat or vibration. Could these be the remnants of Tartarian frequency technology resonating, still impressing their geometry upon the Earth? Others suggest a more haunting possibility, that the circles are messages left by descendants of Tartaria survivors hidden among us, or forces dwelling just beyond our perception. The fields then become their canvas, the geometry their language. A warning, or perhaps an instruction for those willing to look beyond surface explanations. Across the world, ancient cultures built in similar forms, stone circles in Britain, star forts across Europe, mandalas in Asia, desert geoglyphs in Peru, all carried the same theme of geometry tied to energy, space and the cosmos. Crop circles may simply be the latest chapter in that long lineage, a continuity of pattern that whispers of civilizations who once aligned the Earth itself with the stars. If so, then these circles are not accidents but reminders, blueprints of power, resonance, harmony, and perhaps even portals etched into the fabric of our world, resurfacing, just enough to tease us with what we've forgotten. In nearly every mythology's time itself is not a straight line but a cycle of ages. The Greeks spoke of the ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. The Hindus of Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. Even the Mayans told of successive worlds, each destroyed and reborn. Always the pattern is the same, an age of light and harmony, followed by decline, catastrophe, and renewal. Through the lens of the alternative history we've been tracing, this cycle may not be myth at all, but a record of resets. Civilizations rise master forces beyond our comprehension, and then, whether by design or by accident, are swept away. Within this framework, some theorists suggest a 5 eras theory. The first era, a golden world of giants and gods when earth and sky were one. The second era. The age of early great civilizations, now remembered only in fragments as Atlantis or Mu. The third era. The rise of empires known to conventional history: Egypt, Sumer, the Indus, China already carrying echoes of the ones before. The fourth era, Tartaria, the hidden empire, the age of free energy, monumental architecture, and a global harmony that ended in mudfire and plague. The fifth era, our own time, the plastic age built not on stone or resonance, but on petrochemicals, silicon, and mass forgetting. The unsettling question is, where are we in the cycle? If Tartaria was the fourth erased in a reset, are we the fragile fifth destined to be buried under plastic glass and electronic dust? Or are we at the threshold of a sixth era, a rebirth, where we rediscover what was lost? Signs are ambiguous. On one hand, we see a civilization overextended its foundations, creaking rising seas, poisoned skies, fractured societies. On the other, technology is once again pushing at the boundaries of the possible quantum fields, artificial suns, and the faint whisper of free energy experiments echoing Tartaria's supposed mastery. The ancients believed that each reset is both a punishment and a chance. Destruction clears the slate, but memory, if preserved in myth, in stone, or in hidden vaults, becomes the seed of renewal. Perhaps the 5 eras are not fixed at all. Perhaps we hold in our hands the choice to end as another layer in the buried earth, or to step into the 6th era, one of conscious remembering. Part 39. Skeptics and the Debunking Case. Every great mystery carries with it a shadow. The skeptics, the historians, the scientists, who insist there is no hidden empire, no suppressed past, only misread evidence and overgrown myths. For Tartaria, the mainstream explanation is almost disarmingly simple. Tartary was never a unified empire, they argue, but merely a cartographic label, a placeholder for lands poorly known to Europeans. From the 16th through the 19th centuries, maps shaded vast stretches of Central Asia with that word, but it was never a political state, just a shorthand for the unknown. The so-called mud floods, not cataclysm, but a practical solution urban raising. Cities like Chicago and Seattle are well documented to have lifted entire blocks of buildings to install sewer systems beneath them. What looks like a buried first floor may be nothing more than a 19th century civil engineering project recorded and photographed in plain sight. As for the giant skeptics, point to a long trail of hoaxes and exaggerations. In the late 19th century, newspapers thrived on sensationalism. Stories of giant bones discovered in mounds or fields often turned out to be misidentified mastodon remains or outright fabrications. The famous Cardiff giant, a stone figure buried to be discovered, became a carnival attraction, a reminder of how easily people can be led by awe, and the world's fairs with their impossible architecture. Scholars note that these were indeed built on a monumental scale, but largely with plaster-on-wood facades designed to impress for a season and then torn down. The dreamlike white city of Chicago's 1893 fair was no inheritance of Tartarian palaces, they say, but the ingenuity of modern architects with cheap temporary materials. To the skeptics, the Tartaria narrative is a collage of selective seeing and wishful thinking, a patchwork built from coincidences, anomalies, and misunderstandings. They argue that human history is fascinating enough without layering on conspiracies the real achievements of ancient engineers, the real devastations of earthquakes and fires, the real cycles of human ingenuity and collapse. And yet, even as the debunkers explain, dismiss, and reframe, the questions linger. Why do so many myths from so many cultures repeat the same motifs? Why do we keep circling back to stories of lost ages, buried giants, sudden resets? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one side or the other, but in recognizing the tension itself, the space between skepticism and wonder, where imagination, memory, and history intersect. Every story carries power, and when stories drift from curiosity into conviction that power can shape the world in dangerous ways, the Tartarian narrative, fascinating, evocative, and rich in mystery, has also become in some circles a weapon. Historians and skeptics warn of a larger pattern pseudo-history. These are tales that blur myth and fact until the line disappears. On the surface, they can feel harmless, even playful, a grand puzzle about mud floods, giants, and hidden empires. But beneath pseudo-history often carries hidden risks. One danger is distrust. By suggesting that all official history is a lie, that every archaeologist or historian is part of a cover-up, pseudo-history feeds a worldview where no institution can be trusted. Schools, museums, archives once dismissed as complicit lose their authority. In that vacuum, alternative narratives flourish unchecked, guided less by evidence than by ideology. Another danger is appropriation. Lost empire theories can slide into nationalism or extremism. In the past, pseudo-histories have been used to justify racial superiority, territorial conquest, or cultural erasure. Claiming that our people descend from an advanced, forgotten civilization, while others are merely latecomers, has been a recurring theme in extremist propaganda. Even Tartaria in the wrong hands can be twisted into a banner for movements that seek to rewrite the past to serve the present. Debunkers do not fear Tartaria theories because of the stories themselves, they fear the uses to which those stories may be put. Myths that seem like harmless speculation can over time harden into political weapons, giving shape and fuel to anger, division, or control. And yet there's a paradox here. Humans need myths. We crave wonder, mystery, and the idea that the world still holds secrets. The challenge is to walk carefully, to embrace imagination, without letting it be captured by those who would bend it toward fear or domination. The story of Tartaria, then, is more than a question of history. It is also a mirror showing us how fragile the line can be between exploration and exploitation, between a search for wonder and the risk of manipulation. For more than a century, mainstream historians have dismissed Tartaria as a phantom, nothing more than an outdated geographic label. The mudflood urban grading projects, the impossible architecture neoclassical design spread by empire and industry, giants' hoaxes and exaggerations. By every conventional measure, the case should be closed. And yet the theory persists, not quietly, not in dusty corners, but vibrantly thriving online, shared in forums, videos, and endless image threads. Why, one reason is emotional appeal. The Tartarian narrative offers something modern life often withholds wonder. In an age where the world feels mapped and measured, the idea that vast chapters of history remain hidden is intoxicating. To imagine lost cities beneath our feet or towers built with technologies we no longer understand scratches a deep itch, the longing to believe the world is bigger than we've been told. Another reason is nostalgia for beauty. Much of the Tartarian myth grows from architecture. The domes, spires, and ornate facades of the 19th century stand in stark contrast to the glass, steel, and concrete of today. When people ask why don't we build like this anymore, it's not always a technical question. It's an ache for a sense of grandeur and craft that feels lost. If those old buildings seem too magnificent to be merely Victorian, then imagining them as remnants of a vanished empire becomes a way of honouring their power. Then there is distrust in authority. Every debunking, every museum explanation or academic article can feel to the true believer like further proof of a cover-up. The more historians insist there was no Tartaria, the more it seems there must have been. It becomes less about evidence and more about identity. Believing in Tartaria signals a refusal to accept the official story. Finally, the theory persists because it speaks to a yearning for hidden order. In a world of chaos, loss, and accelerating change, it's comforting to think there was once a civilization that mastered harmony, geometry, energy, architecture, faith, and that traces of it survive for those with eyes to see. Tartaria is not just a theory, it is a story. And stories once loosed into the world are hard to kill, especially when they whisper what people most long to hear, that there is more to the world than we know. If there is one theme that breathes life into the Tartaria narrative, it is secrecy. The theory does not just claim that a great civilization was forgotten, it insists it was deliberately erased. And in human imagination, nothing is more magnetic than the forbidden. Consider the case of Nikola Tesla. His name surfaces again and again in these conversations, the eccentric genius who dreamed of wireless energy and global communication, who built towers that seemed to brush the edge of magic. When he died in 1943, the FBI seized his papers. To historians, this was routine national security precaution. To Tartarian theorists, it was proof that technologies echoing the old world, resonance-free energy wireless transmission, were still being hidden. Or take the Smithsonian Institution, often accused in conspiratorial circles of burying giant skeletons unearthed in the 19th century. Official records say otherwise, but the charge sticks. Why? Because the idea of a vault, some secret basement, where inconvenient bones are locked away, fits perfectly into the story of a civilization erased. Even patents themselves feed the fire. Thousands are classified each year, sealed under national security. Most are mundane communications defense cryptography. But for those seeking Tartarian echoes, it is easy to imagine that suppressed among them lie designs for anti-gravity craft, harmonic generators, or the blueprints for the great towers of the past. Secrecy is compelling because it invites imagination to rush into the gaps. When information is missing, we invent. When institutions withhold, we suspect. And when an entire civilization is said to have been written out of history, the allure is irresistible. The hidden becomes more believable than the revealed. In the end, the power of suppression lies not in what is concealed, but in what we imagine could be. The vault may be empty, but the mind fills it with wonders. If a civilization were buried, could it still whisper not in stones or bones, but in the mind? Carl Jung once suggested that humanity shares a collective unconscious, a reservoir of symbols, stories, and archetypes that seem to echo across cultures. In this idea, Tartaria need not be in the history books to survive. It could live in the shadow realm of memory, surfacing in the form of myth, dream, or vision. Across Siberia and Central Asia, shamans spoke of sky cities of light, wheels turning in the heavens, towers that hummed with power. Were these metaphors for natural forces, or faint recollections of a civilization that once commanded them? In dream reports catalogued by folklorists, ordinary people across centuries have described visions of giant halls underground, of golden machines half buried in mud, of children carried away to start life in a new city. Psychologists explain these as archetypal images, death and rebirth, the descent into the underworld. But to Tartaria believers, they sound like fragments of cultural memory, encoded in the mind long after the facts were erased. Folklore itself may function as a kind of mnemonic survival kit. The Norse remembered giants, the Bible spoke of Gog and Magog. Native American traditions told of tall people who walked before the tribes. Were these tales simply myth-making, or the dreamlike persistence of a history too vast, too threatening to record directly? Shamans, mystics, and visionaries throughout time have claimed to see what the waking world forgets. When they chant drum or slip into trance, they sometimes describe descending into caverns, meeting the old ones, or touching a source of light below the earth. Could these be encounters with the psychic ruins of Tartaria? Not buildings, but impressions still imprinted on the human field of memory. Whether one calls it myth, dream, or collective echo, the allure is the same, that even if every document is burned, every map redrawn, the human mind itself refuses to forget. If Tartaria fell, did all of its wonders vanish with it? Or do fragments still hum quietly in our own world, too subtle for mainstream science to name, too uncanny to ignore? Consider the star forts that dot Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Official history calls them defensive bastions of the Renaissance, shaped to deflect cannon fire. But for Tartaria theorists, their geometry suggests something more. Their radiating lines and nested bastions resemble resonance circuits, amplifiers of energy, rather than mere military walls. Some enthusiasts claim to have measured electromagnetic surges in their centres, as if the ground itself still remembers being part of a living grid. Then there are the cathedral's grand Gothic structures said to be built to glorify God, but stand beneath their vaults, hum a single note, and the sun is reply. Acoustic engineers have shown how particular chambers resonate at human vocal frequencies, creating the sensation of choirs greater than the number of singers. Was this artistry or technology hidden in plain sight, a way of magnifying sound into something that touches the nervous system like an ancient form of frequency medicine? Even the megaliths of older ages, Stonehenge, Karnak, Nabta Playa, are drawn into the speculation. Some researchers have noted that they sit at nodes of geomagnetic peculiarity, places where compasses drift or electrical instruments falter. Did Tartaria inherit and refine these placements, building cities and star forts atop Earth's natural energy veins? In Moscow, in Prague, and Seville, tourists see only charming old plazas. But for those tuned to another frequency, the geometry hints at dormant machines disguised as art, domes, spires, rose windows, with not only symbols of faith but antennae, resonators, amplifiers. If so, then Tartaria has not vanished. It sleeps beneath our feet and above our heads, waiting for someone with the right key or the right tone to wake it once more. History, whether true or distorted, often serves as a mirror. The Tartarian myth of a radiant civilization erased by floods, fire, and secrecy draws so many not only because it is strange, but because it is cautionary. If such a world once thrived and fell, could ours not follow the same arc? Yet within the story lies not just fear but hope. If Tartaria mastered resonance-free energy and architecture that healed rather than harmed, then perhaps these are not lost forever. They might remain not in stone alone, but in memory, intuition, and experiment waiting for humanity to reclaim them. Imagine a world where sound becomes medicine, not noise, where the vibrations of voice instrument and tune chamber align human bodies the way cathedrals once aligned choirs. Envision free energy not chained to oil wells or monopolies, but drawn from the Earth's fields, the sun's endless bear, or frequencies already swirling around us. Consider what it would mean if cities were built again on harmonic geometry designed not to consume, but to sustain, each building a participant in the health of those who walk its halls. The Tartarian lesson, whether real, metaphorical, or a blend of both, seems to whisper unity, sustains division, destroys. If their collapse came from suppression, conquest, or secrecy, then renewal may come from openness, cooperation, and shared purpose. Every reset imagined or remembered carries within it the seed of renewal. Our age too teeters on thresholds, climate, energy, technology, community. We may not raise star forts or gilded domes, but we can choose whether the future resembles a forgotten ruin or a living temple of humanity. To break the cycle is not to cling to Tartaria as fact, nor to dismiss it as folly. It is to recognize in the tale a deeper yearning for a civilization in harmony with itself, its science, and its soul. That dream need not be buried. It can be lived if we dare. And now we arrive at the end. Not the end of history, never that, but the quiet close of this long wandering through shadows and whispers. We have walked among the ruins, traced the outlines of half-buried cities, listened to the tales of giants and floods of forgotten continents and impossible machines. We have followed orphan trains into emptied streets, peered at maps inked with names that no longer appear, and felt the hum of power in cathedrals and starforts. Some say it is myth, others call it madness. Yet something in the story lingers like the resonance of a struck bell long after the sound has faded. What if Tartaria is not simply a theory but an echo of a truth buried in mud, in silence, in the broken rhythm of centuries, an echo that rises in our dreams, in the mysteries we refuse to let go? And perhaps that is enough to remind us that history is never finished, that memory is not only what is written in books, but what lives in stone, in story, and the restless questions we carry. So as you close your eyes, let the thought drift with you. What if the world you know is only one layer, and beneath it, just out of reach, waits another, a world of harmony, of energy, of forgotten wonder, a world called by many names, a world some still whisper of as Tartaria? Rest now. Let the questions keep watch while you sleep. For sometimes mystery is the best companion into dreams. What does it mean to learn that the earth is layered not just with stone but with memory? That for every city we build another may one day be forgotten, swallowed, waiting for rediscovery. The revelations of the past decades, LiDAR maps of buried cities, radar scans of hidden chambers, muon images of sealed voids, are not only about the ancient world. They are also a mirror held up to us. They remind us that civilizations are fragile, that what seems permanent can in a few centuries be reduced to dust roots and silence. Think of the flood myths that whisper across cultures. Once dismissed as stories, they now echo in geological records of rising seas and sudden climate shifts. Think of the ruins beneath oceans, the drowned temples off India's coast, the sunken stonework off Yonaguni in Japan. If whole cities could vanish, then why not now rising seas again threaten the shorelines where billions of us live? Future archaeologists may one day find glass towers lying beneath silt, the traces of our age as strange to them as pyramids are to us. We imagine ourselves as unique, but the cycle is old growth, collapse, burial, rediscovery. The very technologies that allow us to peer into the past also offer a glimpse into the long arc of the future. If ancient peoples once built on a scale that could only be understood from the sky, what will our highways and megacities look like when reduced to faint lines beneath a jungle canopy? If they encoded myths as memory, what stories will survive of us when our data is gone, our servers erased? Perhaps this is the humbling lesson of all the anomalies: the stone too heavy, the tunnels too deep, the myths too persistent. Not that there was one lost civilization, but that civilizations themselves are always in danger of being lost. Each age is a layer, each city a fossil in waiting. And so when we look at the mysteries of Tartaria, or the great flood myths, or the star-shaped forts only visible from above, we may be glimpsing not only what came before, but what may come after. The deep past and the deep future touch in this realization we too will be buried, perhaps not under mud floods or glaciers, but under time itself. And one day someone will peel back the earth, scan the soil, read our ruins like riddles, and wonder what we forgot to remember.